Okay, we are live. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the August 24th edition of the Saturday Free School. We're back in person again at the Church of the Crucifixion following our two-day online event on Wednesday and Thursday. And we'll be spending some time reviewing and discussing that event, which was timed with the Democratic Party's National Convention in Chicago. And the event was titled Breaking Free from the House of Bondage, James Baldwin Speaks to the 2024 Election. And so we'll have Meghna, Jahan, and Neha, who organized the event, kind of give a debrief and assessment of that, and then we'll discuss it. And then lastly, we'll spend some time talking more about the free school, how we're going forward, and our future. Did you want to say anything?
No.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So we can turn it over to our friends in Illinois and Chicago, Jahan, Meghna, and Neha, if you guys want to talk through the event.
Yes, thank you, Jeremiah. I hope our sound is good, and good morning, everybody. My colleagues and I have prepared a report back that I'll start by going over. So basically, we kind of organized it by some of the key points that we felt were established by the event, and then some lessons that we are taking from the event or things we would like to develop further. So starting with some of the points, I think that first of all, we established that the Democratic Party, as seen in the DNC, is the most dangerous political force in the world at this time. It is the white supremacist party of the elite, of genocide, of nuclear war, and it is an existential threat to world humanity as well as the American people. And we emphasize that it must be stopped at any cost for the future of humanity and for the future of the nation. And concretely, that means the defeat of the Kamala Harris campaign this year and everyone associated with the campaign. We also saw that the DNC made clear the ruling elite's intentions of attacking the American people by misappropriating and weaponizing their own history against them, particularly attempting to control the narrative of this over the civil rights movement to give itself the legitimacy which it lacks in the eyes of the people. We also established that immigrants who have no quarrel with the American empire and white supremacy, like Kamala Harris and Barack Obama, are being used against the Black freedom struggle and the Black American people. And that was obviously something seen throughout the DNC, but that is a very important point that has continued to be seen. And I think what happened on the DNC on Thursday and Kamala Harris's speech has also given us more evidence for that. But continuing, also that the struggle for democracy is paramount in this period, and that we must turn to the Black freedom struggle, which has made an essential contribution to the struggle for democracy. And particularly, we established and emphasized the fact that the civil rights movement has pushed the tactic of race war off the table politically. And now, in this time, our duty is to push the tactic of regime change and world war off the table. And this is because the ruling elite, in its attempt to hold on to power, is dragging the world into a nuclear war amid this crisis. In addition, we established that the Black freedom struggle has taught us that the struggle for democracy is inherently connected to the struggle for human completeness. And this is, perhaps something we also develop more, but coming out of the year of Baldwin, and that this struggle for human completeness, which is essentially tied to the democratic struggle, includes various kinds of human striving, such as Baldwin's arguments about spiritual values, the role of art, literature, and culture. And related to this, we established that Baldwin is a theorist of crisis for our time, the one who most clearly explains the crisis of American society in this time. He is a theorist specifically suited for this crisis that we are in today, the end of the last empire, or perhaps as Baldwin put it, the last white nation. And he speaks very concretely to this time, revealing the manifestations of this crisis, not just in the political, social relationships that people have, but also the interior lives of people. And this is in contrast to theorists such as Gramsci. So through Baldwin, we see the way forward. And very important also is that Baldwin is a voice of a civilization of peace. And as we discussed in our event, this is a civilization of Afro America, which arose from the struggle for peace. And for Baldwin, freedom is inherently tied to the struggle for peace and democracy. And so, using these terms, democracy is incompatible with war and the Democratic Party war machine. So then getting into some of the lessons that we learned, and perhaps some of my colleagues can also expand on this. But I think reflecting on the event, again, we see that the DNC has made clear that the ideological struggle is paramount. The aggressive propaganda of the DNC is a direct attack on the revolutionary spirit of the American people. So it's our responsibility in this crucial time to arm people with the ideas of Black freedom struggle, especially Baldwin, to educate, clarify, and take down the ruling elite's propaganda. And we must be prepared to double down and go hard on this task until November, at the very least, as the risk of world war, nuclear war, and repression continue to grow each week. Also, another lesson for us was that we see that in these times, words like love, freedom, peace, and democracy are being used by the ruling elite for their propaganda, stripped of all meaning. So we must be very clear and precise when we use these concepts. And we realize that Baldwin uses concepts in a way very different from liberal political theory, including, again, his use of terms like love, morality, and others. In particular, Baldwin connects love to humanity and the future. So we must be very thoughtful in establishing this and in the way that we approach the language Baldwin uses and how we explain Baldwin to the people. So this is something that we must be very attentive to, and something we ourselves feel that we should continue to work on. So I will turn it over to my colleagues to fill in anything that I missed.
Yeah, I just think that the formulations really are a direct attack on everything that the DNC was trying to achieve, like democracy as incompatible with war, Afro-America as a civilization of peace. And those things, yeah, they can never be manipulated when people have these ideas at their side. So I'll let Neha jump in. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think most of the points are covered, but like I just wanted to bring in what I was also experiencing for the first time, because I think this is the first election that I am closely paying attention to, the American election. And um, coming from India, like I had certain assumptions about like America, like, about the democratic process in America and like the election process. And I felt sometimes that like that I couldn't make sense of it. And I think this DNC was very educative, like for me in that sense, because the intense propaganda that happens during elections. And I think I got um it's yeah, the thing is that the ruling elite are very sophisticated and insidious, but also extremely evil, because they weaponize the very ideas that people rely on to attack them, and in ways uh, that often are like, like they utilize certain icons and they've reduced history into something of symbols, and they try to use or like misappropriate these symbols. And it is a direct attack. And I'm only like getting like learning to appreciate how intense the attack must be, like on people uh who are constantly at the receiving end of this propaganda. Like I think that's something that I've been thinking about. And it also makes it very important in this time to understand these ideas, apply them, and to also like completely um, Yeah, like the importance of ideological struggle, as Jahan was saying, that in these times becomes more important, and I think in that uh, in line of that, like I think something like the reading groups and the year of Baldwin become gain like so much more importance, because I think the next few months are going to be so important, where people have to be equipped, and it's an attack on the revolutionary spirit of people, as Serafina was saying in the round table, that this is an attack, and at this point the task for for everybody who's interested in transforming the society must be to develop these ideas, to engage with these ideas as honestly, and help uh, develop them and apply them.
Yeah, I would say, to add to what you guys are saying, and thanks for the assessment and recap. I feel like, honestly, for a lot of us, just watching the DNC was very infuriating, to use that language. And I think in part, like, what offended me, and I think offended a lot of us in free school, was exactly what you guys are saying, which was the grotesqueness of the spectacle, but also specifically the way that the Democratic Party like tries so hard to present itself as the inheritor of the legacy of the civil rights movement. And I think part of what I felt strongly and almost a little bit daunted by, to be honest, going into our discussion, was I think there are times when it feels like, are we the only group? Are we the only group in this country that will go upright and say, like, this is not only wrong, but like it has to actually be condemned, like this appropriation of the civil rights movement. And I wonder sometimes, like, oh, like, are we the only ones who feel the moral obscenity of the Democrats? And I know that's not true, but I think there is, in some ways, part of what the event made me realize is, like, I don't know exactly like what's going to happen to whatever calls itself the left. And at the same time, part of what the DNC and our discussion just made me realize much more concretely was there is a very fierce battle that needs to be waged over this history. Something that's about the past, but it's about the present and it's about the future. And in their own way, the elites who are kind of running the Democratic Party recognize that. And they recognize in their own way the power of the memory of the civil rights movement, even just the memory of it and what it represents. And I think, yeah, sometimes it's like we have to go full in on that task of actually engaging in that battle. And it doesn't have to be based off of like, oh, like trying to be popular or trying to do, trying to get lots of clicks, but it has to be based on what's right, and what we feel the moral imperative is. And I think the question is, I think with our celebration of Baldwin a few weeks ago in Philly, like in person, I think part of what we realized or are seeing also with the year of Baldwin is there is a hunger amongst the people for not just for ideas, but to actually be part of that struggle. And how, like what do we do and how can we involve people in that struggle, and make it something which is not abstract, but actually very concrete. And yeah, I really appreciated, especially the second day conversation, because I think it, in some ways, like it crystallized a lot of things that we were talking about on the first day, on Wednesday. And yeah, like I think it's also like it was also important for me though on the first day to like talk through that like basic question of like, yeah, like why are we doing this event in response to the DNC? Like why not the Republican National Convention? And yeah, I think just personally, like I wish I had almost prepared for like talking through that more, just for myself. And I feel like there are certain like standards or expectations I have of myself. But even beyond that, I think a lot of it is, like Jahan was saying, you can disagree with both parties and also see the two-party system as corrupt. But the inevitable reality of what we are seeing and what we are going through as a country is there is something distinct about the Democratic Party, not just in terms of its appropriation of the civil rights movement, but also in terms of it being, like Jahan said, the most dangerous political force in the world today. And like even as the DNC was happening, yeah, there's like news coming out that like Biden has secretly approved basically a strategy to do simultaneous nuclear confrontation with China, North Korea, and Russia. And obviously the genocide in Gaza has been ongoing. And then, yeah, like in Kamala's speech, I feel like many people were saying it was the most warlike presidential nomination speech that they heard in quite some time. And I think part of that is like Kamala is very clearly taking up the like Biden's mantle of being the most pro-war, pro-NATO president. And I don't know, it's we talked about it before with it was like the NATO summit in DC that Biden spoke at, but it's so clear that the Democratic Party and its elites and the people who run the party and who are the figureheads of the party, they care so much more about maintaining empire than they do actually care about the American people. And the only thing that they have is basically whatever weapons and leverage of ideological propaganda and control that they may exercise over people's consciousness. But yeah, I think that is, I don't know, part of what I was reflecting on. And yeah, there is, I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight of, within just kind of the churn of the political cycle and the election season and all the noise and the mainstream media and stuff, to lose sight of like what's really at stake, without panicking about it, but actually just being upfront about it and serious about it, and actually trying to make that the conversation and to make that the terms of discourse. Because a lot of what I think is whatever, like what we call the ideological struggle, a lot of that is kind of the function of it is like, what are the actual terms of discourse? Like, what do we, like, do we have a say in actually determining like what people, like, I guess the narrative about this moment and what's really at stake again. But yeah, I really appreciated the chance to actually like even just process through like what we were seeing at the DNC, and yeah, like part of, I guess the last thing I'll say is part of what makes me angry is I think we know, like even some of us know specific people in our lives who are not just supporters of the Democratic Party, but are trying to become like agents in it, or trying to become like movers and shakers, especially with like the Democrats' like new embrace of like influencers and stuff. And the thing is that I know, like, whether it's individual people or just our generation, speaking as like younger people, like I know these people. I know that in their hearts they realize that there's something like fucked up about what they're doing. And I think they feel it, and yet there's still this, I don't know, like I struggle sometimes to make sense of it morally, like how, like, you know what, at a bare minimum, you know that this administration is responsible for a genocide. I don't see how that can't be a red line for you as a person. And I think people know that they're lying to themselves. And I think that's part of what disturbs me, is like people who should know, who I feel should know better, still acting as if like either there's not a problem, or like you can just smooth the problems over by being like, oh, like we'll still, you know, at least we have a seat at the table, and at least like we can try to gain leverage on like Kamala or whatever. And I think that's part of what disturbs me, is like yeah, like is our generation, and I don't think this is true, but I think there are people in our generation, like young people, who are more interested in whether it's pursuing power or whether it's like gaining influence or whether it's being accepted in elite circles and institutions. Like that's what's more important to them than like humanity, basically. And I think that has to be actually said outright. But yeah.
You know, I'd like to congratulate the people who organized the two-day event. It's really an insightful political thing to do. However, as you know, I have certain criticisms, and I think we should be upfront about it. I thought the first day was a bit awkward. And I know what we were trying to do to locate Baldwin as a thinker of crises. So, but it came off too awkwardly, and we did not make our case. I don't think we even defined what type of crisis we're dealing with. I'd like to come back to that. Very, very important. And then the claim that a party of war cannot be a party of anti-white supremacy. And a party of white supremacy can only be a party of war. And I think we have to develop our capacities to make this case, because we're not talking to ourselves. And as we see, the Democratic Party is the instrument of the ideological position of the ruling class, of the most dangerous people in the world. It is that party. And on that, there cannot be a compromise. But let me just step back. You know, why do they need to appropriate the Black struggle? And the other question is, why is it so easy? You know, of course, as we have said, that the Black freedom movement was the third American Revolution. Martin Luther King is the father of a new nation, if there is to be one. That Baldwin is a great political thinker who's indispensable for this time. But most people don't know the civil rights movement. They have a wrong characterization of it, the one that has been perpetrated by the ruling class for now we can see, for the reasons of war. If they can hide behind the Jesse Jacksons, the Al Sharptons, and their claim, the Democrats and the ruling classes claim of fidelity to this, well, you have a great moral veil to hide your crimes against humanity. How could we be criminals against humanity? We believe in Martin Luther King, don't we? And this is grotesque. This is a great moral crime against the African American people, participated in by the Blackness leadership class. Not to mention the labor movement, we're going to come back to that. So this was on display. I think the high point of the first day, by the way, was the interrogation of how immigrants, the elite immigrants, function as, quote, Black people, promote a narrative against Black people. I thought that was a very important part of the first day. But, you know, going forward, we want to make the case that the Democratic Party is the party of white supremacy, a white supremacist party. People will say, well, how can you say that? All the Black leaders in the Democratic Party. Most Black people vote Democrat. And look at the Democratic Party convention. Look at all those Black people. Of course, it was a performance, because when somebody Black spoke, they put a lot of Black people up front. When somebody white spoke, what happened to the Black people suddenly? You know, so it was a cynical move. But people will rightfully ask, how can it be a party of white supremacy when most Black people are in it? The first Black president, I put quotes around that Black thing, was a Democrat. And now the Democratic Party has as its candidate for president a, again, quotes, Black woman. Okay? And here's where the historical chronology must be deployed in all of its nuances and forcefulness. We cannot just say it is a white supremacist party. Why is it true? We have to make the case to the people. Just to say it is not enough. Okay? And here we're not just talking to Black people, we're talking to the whole nation who believe that with the Civil Rights Act, Black people are free. With the election of Obama, Black people are free. What are you talking about? And here is where, again, I say the chronology. The modern political system of both parties, its roots are in the defeat, the counter-revolution against Reconstruction. And Black folk have not been free. Slavery ended, Black people are not free. And the political party system exists to maintain an order, a social order that keeps Black folk unfree. Now, people say, well, what you mean unfree? Then we have to go to the data. By unfree, we're talking about any part so stark that the situation of Black people is not replicated anywhere else in the society. And I include among that the Native Americans. The levels of incarceration, imprisonment, of home, I mean, just you go across the board, we don't have to. That level of inequality in a society is a measure of unfreedom. And those data and their, how they have come about go back to the defeat of Reconstruction, and hence the claim slavery ended, but Black folk have never been free. So both parties participate in this. The other thing is we must develop the notion of the white supremacist social system. Here, I mean, we're going against both liberal dogma and radical or Marxist dogma. And it's a bit daunting that you cannot make any headway with either side. With the social democrats, they're so locked into what they believe in, and Marx had it right, or the new Marxist Leninist and the new Communist Party, not to mention the old one, cannot understand the history of this country and the nature of the social system. And this is where, of course, the theory of a social system that does not exclude the political economy, but does not privilege it over the larger social system, because the social system is where people's lives are lived in their more completeness. That's where people live. That's where Black people live. They don't just live and lives of economic class. And to see that is to not see them. You know what I'm saying? So, okay, I'm getting a little, I don't mean to. We got to get this right. It's not just a matter of stating it. We have to, even as we state it, we have to be aware of the comeback. Well, if I said this, let us say, just imagine a friend that you would have. You say, well, the Democratic Party is a white supremacist party. I have some of my friends that would say certain things. Well, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't the Republican Party, isn't Trump
Mm-hmm.
the white supremacist?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to deny that. But having said that does not negate the Democratic Party is a white supremacist party. In fact, the most effective one and the most cynical white supremacists, and deny it and have an army of Black agents and tools that will say this is the party that of freedom. We have to make the case. The other thing is, I think, and this, and I'm not making the case, I don't want to talk too much. If you ask me, I could make the case. I think I could make the case. I don't think it's a hard case to make once you understand what the origins of the modern American social system. Once you understand that, and how is it that after all these decades, all this struggle, Black folk are still unequal? I'm sorry, let me continue. How? This is outrageous. And then to have the insult of postmodern identity politics. Don't bring no gay, trans in my face and say this is the new civil rights movement. In the face of this level of inequality of at least 30 million people who have fought for the rights of all people and have gotten less. And this is why the question of an immigrant, you're not Black, Kamala Harris, and stop perpetrating a fraud. It's an insult to us. Barack Obama, you're not a Black man. And by Black, we're talking about this life world, this fight, this struggle, this sacrifice, this suffering. Any other way to look at it is spitting upon the ordinary Black person we pass by every day in this city. So we have to come with the argument strongly put and ask the question, and it's so apparent. The modern political party system in the United States, with changes over time, okay, with the New Deal, the Democratic Party became a Southern and a Northern party, a Jim Crow party and a non-Jim Crow party, and okay. The Republican Party changes after the Civil Rights Movement, yada, yada, yada. Okay, all of that. But in its fundament, the current party system exists to justify the racial order and hence to justify this extreme inequality. Just a small, so many people in free school have parents who are immigrants. They can't figure this out no kind of way. You know what I'm saying? Can't figure it out. Big question mark. Well, why haven't Black people made more progress? That's a question throughout the country. Most Americans who are not Black say or ask the question to which they always give the wrong answer. Why haven't Black people made more progress? Are they inherently inferior? Is there something natural and inherent to them? You know what I'm saying? And then you get the Democratic Party. If you're anti-white supremacist, if you're for Black freedom, why don't you address it openly? Why all this performative anti-racism? And that's all it is. as they rush quickly to say that we're the party of war. We're the party of genocide. You understand where I'm coming from? Michelle Obama, you can't. I'm not moved by you or your husband or your mother, anybody else. You are, in essence, a traitor to the freedom of Black people. We wage, and let us, am I talking? You see, we have to take seriously the Black freedom movement. The documentary is so moving. Look at those photos. Look at that sacrifice. Listen to that music. The way those people sang. You know, the sacrifice. No other people in this country come anywhere near it. Nowhere near it. The labor movement, nowhere near it. At its best of times, nowhere close to it. You see what I'm saying? To challenge the system at its base and to provide an alternative that is civilizational, that is part of all of humanity. Oh, you know, we forget that. So the case can be made, and we have to make it. We have to make the case and think how we argue it to those people we know best. You know, just don't think you're speaking to, you know, like an audience of 10,000, just an audience of 2. Can I convince 2 people? And that'll be a test of the quality of your thinking. I just wanted to say one other thing. Once you do the chronology right, to say that the moral imperative is the revolutionary imperative, you want to do the right thing, you have to assert the necessity of a revolutionary change. Now, what do we mean by revolution? You know, I think we can make the case for a revolution of the people. You know, every revolution is a change of power from one group to another. What was Martin Luther King? What were they talking about? They were not talking about a replay of the Russian Revolution. That was them and there. That ain't us and now. We don't have to be an imitation of anything. This is the quality of the Black people. Why we got to, you know, we got to redo Russia 19? No, we don't. No, we don't. And even if we tried, we couldn't do it. The logic of the history of the United States says that the Black freedom movement was a third American Revolution. You got a problem with that? Why? What is your problem? Why? Because Black people was leading it? You know? Because they used their religion as a weapon to build unity? Oh, you don't like that? Mm-hmm. What don't you like? Or maybe you just don't like Black people. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you don't like what you can't know. Maybe they're too deep for you. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So we have to, you know, and like we went through Judith Butler, the transgender thing. Look, transgender. Cool. Leave it there. That ain't no world historic nothing. That will not free anybody from anything. Can we get, and I think we have to be 100 about this. It's an insult to the people, and especially Black people of this country. It's an insult to the poor, okay? So we're talking about the moral as the revolutionary imperative. What we're saying, and I think we can use this language, that the revolutionary struggle seeks to achieve a revolutionary, democratic, and emancipatory state. A state of the people. Power must be taken from the war makers and the white supremacists. This is one of the strongest cases against the Democratic Party, especially as it is now constituted. And that's what we have to say, how it constitutes itself, what it is, not just because it's the Democratic Party, but what it is. And so the ideological struggle, there must be a fierce one in the Black community. This is going to be rough, because Black people are very skeptical of everybody for good reason, betrayed most times by most people in the United States. They don't trust a lot of people. So the argument must be made carefully and with great sensitivity to their feelings. Yeah, y'all in this party, but it ain't your party. And I want to suggest to you, and frankly, for the masses, the poor and the working class, it ain't that hard to make. This is a party of white supremacy, hiding behind Black traitors. Now, that's the way I would say it. Y'all don't have to say it that way, but I would say it that way. You know what I'm saying? That this party will never be your party, is never intended to be your party, has never been committed to your freedom and to your equality. Never. And the evidence is clear. They said, well, Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act that gave us legal equality, and the Voting Rights Act that gave us the right to vote. You say, yeah. But is legal equality the substance of equality? And so we have, forgive me, anybody, I don't mean to just be going overboard. We have to be strong enough and clear enough to make the case, especially now. Especially now. I have a friend, John Jeter, very brilliant cat. He wrote an article. He said, well, the Democratic Party shot itself in the head when it went with the Clinton policy of becoming Republican-like or Republican-like, et cetera, et cetera. I said, they didn't shoot themselves in the head. That was an imperative of ruling class rule at the time of crisis. They had to, reshape, redefine, rebrand themselves. But what is clear, however it rebrands itself, it is not the party of Black folk. The evidence is clear. And if it's not the party of Black folk, it's not the party of democracy. It's not the party of a future. So I think we have to make this point. This is something that's we have to define the struggle as an all humanity struggle. An all humanity struggle. And we have to be even more developed in how we present this. Within the left and Marxist parties and social democrats and all of that, there's always this attempt to understand class and the class struggle. Usually the model is Europe. You know, in the documentary where we talked about the springtime of the European working class, you know. But then something happens over the last 100 or so years with the liberation of the colonized, with revolutions in Asia and Africa, and the consolidation of state power by the working people of these countries and their transition to new kinds of societies. All of that having been said, and this is Jerry's question, if the struggle is all humanity, which means that what it strives for is at a different level, a different stage than what was articulated in revolutionaries of the 19th and early 20th century. This is something different. They could not have imagined the possibility of wars that would wipe out the whole planet. Nor, I don't think they could see genocide as has been experienced in the 20th century, but even now more open and blatantly in the 21st century. I don't think they fully conceived of the transformative character of the anti-colonial and Black freedom struggles. When I say transformative, the Chinese people will never be what they were before 1949, and certainly in this last 50, 60 years. Never be the same. The Indian people will never be the same. The people of Africa will never be the same. In that sense, the concept of a vanguard party that would speak in the name of the people might not fit the reality of the people at this stage of history. This has to be reconsidered. But one thing is for certain, the issues that will lead to progress and democracy, in the sense that I'm trying to use it, a revolutionary, democratic, and emancipatory project, requiring the participation of tens of millions of people, even in this country.
Right.
Not bound, let me put in Baldwinian, bound by a common sense of a common future. We have to make this argument. A common future, a common struggle. And here the notion of Baldwinian love. And we got to get that, we got to take this love thing out of the hands of this hypocritical ruling class. You know, I mean, just please. The way we talk about it is the way it has to be talked about. And such a concept infused into the thinking of the people. So I'm saying, I agree with you. I don't know of any organizations, and certainly not the civil rights organizations as they exist, are fighting to reclaim the third American Revolution. In fact, I don't know of any of them that claim it's a third American Revolution. Diane Nash would, James Lawson would, maybe a couple of other veterans of that struggle. But they wouldn't even call it that. They do not see a necessity for a fourth American Revolution to fulfill what was unfulfilled in the third, just like you needed a third because of the second that went unfulfilled. We got to continue with this ideological struggle, but we got to be mature and sophisticated and in how we conduct it. How we conduct it. Every word means a lot. Because when you're on this public stage, people are looking for one stumble to discredit the whole thing. And it's not a matter of saying, well, you know what I meant. No, I don't know what you meant. We have to think through everything. And also, I think we've achieved a great deal in this year of Baldwin. Not everything that I wanted, that any of us want to see us achieve. We've achieved something, though. People who heard of the free school are now interested to know the free school. That's good. But let's not get satisfied. You know, our enemies are powerful. They're not our enemies of the people, are powerful. The system of oppression is well oiled. Yeah, we see the American empire in crisis. That don't mean it's going to die out on its own. It don't mean that. You know, yeah, the dollar ain't what it was, you know, decade, 2 decades ago. But that don't mean the game is over. And as long as they can secure their home base, as long as they can keep the people divided, disinterested, even cynical, it's a win for them. So that's me. I guess what I'm saying, it's not that they have to win, they just don't have to lose. And that's the way I think they see it.
I take some time to process everything you said, but I want to begin by saying that I think this is an important thing to directly address the need to be very compelling in this moment because there is so much confusion and lack of ideological clarity, but also very deliberate, concerted attacks on the democratic capacity of the people, which is something that I really liked. I think Nouri brought this up on tape. And honestly, like when I started trying to watch the DNC speeches or something from the beginning, you know, you're angered and just there's this sense of intense discomfort that you even have to watch it. But it took me a while to fully articulate why I felt like that. And it was less the fact that the speakers were that bad and so performative and just basically full of lies. I mean, I guess that part of it to some extent I was expecting. But it was really the response or the very enthusiastic response of what, of course, is not a majority. It's a certain group with a certain value system and a certain agenda for the future who were there and were cheering on those political positions. But it really disturbed me because something that I haven't been able to fully get over, and I don't think it's possible to get over, is how easy it was to basically coronate Kamala Harris and throw Joe Biden to the curb without ever having won democratically any vote of the people. Like when she ran in 2020, Nouri pointed this out, she didn't win any delegates. Her record as Attorney General, I don't know. I mean, she's never been looked at and thought of as impressive by anybody, as far as I can tell. And the fact that there was just this quick adjustment to getting behind her and even deluding yourself into believing that, oh, you know, Kamala is better than Biden. And, you know, this means that we have a better chance at negotiating a ceasefire. It shows how much the attack on the ability of people to engage in the ideological struggle or to be able to take stands when the time demands that you take a stand, or even like, you know, basically to put yourself in the position of, you know, if I can do something about this, I can have a role in my country's future, I can punish my government when it pushes us down this path of destruction. just seeing all those applause and those people crying, it was, I think that part was very hard for me to accept. And I want to, like, this idea of Baldwin as a theorist of crisis, I agree with what you're saying, Doc, that we have to make a strong case for it, because I think Emily has said this in Free School before, and we've really been thinking about this Baldwin as an entry point to the future of the American revolutionary process, because he explains something fundamental that you need to understand to even identify how, like, what path, like, where you're going to start thinking about this problem. Where, I mean, I think this is something that came up in the first day, but Baldwin says that, the political institutions of a nation are a reflection of its spiritual state. And we had a discussion about what spiritual state of the nation, what is he referring to when he says that? And I think it, like, the way that it makes most sense to me is what Doc was saying about white supremacist, a social system, it being related to a life world, or, like, a set of principles or values or a worldview which excludes, a vast majority of people, not just in this country, but also all over the world. And I think in some ways, this idea that, I have to think about this a little more, but this idea that what we are trying to say is the Black freedom movement, what it was trying to achieve was a reversion or a revolution of values, to take the country from a certain way of thinking about the world, which was warlike, which was confrontational, which looked at America's role in the world as a zero-sum game. So if America wins, or if anybody else wins, America loses. To take from that and go to a vision for the future of America, which sought brotherhood with people all across the world, which sought freedom that was substantive in the sense of not just individual freedom in your own lives of making this or that decisions about your person, but freedom in the sense of, do the poor have a future in this country? Do the children of this country have a future? And, when we talk about peace, are we talking about just the absence of war, or are we talking about creating conditions where everybody who's born in this country has dignity, has that opportunity to be able to carve out a life of dignity and, you know, opportunity for themselves? And this is why I feel like Baldwin becomes important, is because I think you need to understand that these are the crises that we've been dealing with, and we're still dealing with it. And the Civil Rights Act did not, like, basically end our need to struggle for the same vision of America, because it was never completed. There was an attack and a regression to an old way of thinking where you could replace these questions of Black freedom or freedom in general and sort of silo it into the question of individual freedom and identity freedom and so on and so forth. Those were some of my thoughts.
Yeah, I actually think this point of assuming that freedom actually already has been achieved is very critical, where I do think a lot of the arguments basically hinge on, well, like the Voting Rights Act was passed and the Third American Revolution, like we won't call it an actual Third American Revolution, but the Civil Rights Movement achieved what it was supposed to achieve, which is basically, I think, in essence, like assimilation, where some Black people will be able to make it, and that's freedom. And that definition of freedom is sufficient. And I think that's also why, like, I think at this point, the Democratic Party is so self-satisfied, because they're like, well, we already, like, we're on the right track and we achieved it, and now we're the party that protects it. And, like, I guess that's the vision. And it does basically lie, I think, in the understanding of chronology and who the people are. But yeah, and I think that's also why the DNC's, like, they use the word freedom a lot. Like, they used it a lot, like, in saying that, oh, like, Kamala Harris will stand for freedom, like, freedom and, like, abortion rights. Yeah, but in the Beyonce song. And I think part of what's so wrong about it is that actually this freedom has not yet been achieved. Like, it's not fulfilled. If anything, freedom is something that still lies in the future as a possibility, but it's something that can only actually be won through struggle. Whereas I think freedom is, in the Democratic Party sense, something that like hazily everybody already knows, everybody already has, and just needs to be, protected. And I also think that part of what the Democratic Party is doing at this point is like what you said, Doc. They don't need to win, they just need to not lose. And so I think part of the disadvantage too is that in the replacement of Biden, and then sort of like the period of, oh, will it be Kamala or not? And then now it's just a coordination of Kamala, but she still hasn't given any interviews.
Right.
And I think some of maybe the weakness still of the people, I think, is that some people do know better, but they're almost hoping or still waiting, I think, to assess what's happening. And I think that was also the challenge that I felt going into this event, which I think it was so important for it to happen, and for it to happen at the same time as the DNC, and to basically process it as it was going on, and to say as clearly as possible, the Democratic Party stands for war. We have known this. It's also evident in everything that's happening day by day. But it's not easy, I think, to respond and to process and to actually assess, and to assess it clearly. And I think emphatically, to basically be confident. And yeah, I think as opposed to waiting for a consensus to emerge, hoping that people will figure it out themselves. And I think that's basically what will be happening leading up to the election too in November. Like there's still, I guess, like a month and a half left, but it's not very much time. And I think right now there's overall just confusion and overall, I think, a sense of division and lack of clarity. And I think that's even what you see in like the protests for the DNC, where you expected maybe 100,000 people to come, and in the end it was maybe 10,000. And even those 10,000 were kind of like, what are we doing here? Like, are we going to be able to actually do anything? Like, are we appealing to the Democrats? Like, and I feel like it's very important, to take what we're doing seriously, and to, I guess, meet the moment and what is needed without, I guess, like leaping or jumping and not having the foundations clear, where what's needed is not just the truth or like the assertion that the Democratic Party is white supremacist, but it's also we need to actually have a path, I think, to explain, what you're
It
saying.
has to be, because it is so at odds with the common view, but it is the truthful view. And it has, I'm sorry, I'm just agreeing, I'm sorry.
No, it's the truthful view, but it's also, like, I don't think now is the time where we can just be cautious and go incrementally, but then we can't just leap without basis and leap without actually being able to, I guess, be scientific or be truthful and to actually be able to describe what's happening. And so I think it's just that continually through this year, I feel like we're accelerating, but it's almost still maybe not quite enough. But I also think that what you were saying about the social system is really important. Like, I really liked that when you said that the social system doesn't negate or eliminate political economy, but actually it's a more complete view of like the world that people actually experience and also shape themselves. And and so I think that's a pretty important direction of exploration. And I think with, in the last few months, I think the exploration of the Black social system has been really deep. And I even think, like, I've been reading this like art history book on the history of African-American artists. And it's really profound, I think, how, by Romare Bearden. But it like really makes concrete this idea of like the Black proletarian imaginary. And I think for me, it's fleshed out a lot of what we mean by the Black social system, where there are consistent positions and consistent views of the world that people are drawn to or eventually end up in, which is that, like, yes, all humanity is one, and my life doesn't mean anything if it's not for the people. And there is such a thing as an African American people who are an American people. And yeah, I think seeing that consistently emerge across different artists, across time and different places means a lot. But I think, yeah, the other side of it is the white supremacist social system, which I don't think has been worked out so much as a complete social system. I feel like we have a sense of it, I think, through Du Bois and Baldwin, which is mostly, I think, the psychological world in some ways, like the wages of whiteness, or like the guilt and the delusion and lies.
Yeah.
But I think part of what I'm still, I guess, trying to figure out is that because it's so pathological, it's almost completely illogical, which makes it difficult right now for me to understand it actually as a system.
I mean, the black social
No, the white supremacist social system.
Can I just say something? By white supremacist social system, we're talking about a social system which in its essence reproduces over historical time white supremacy and the dominance of people who are considered white, and the reproduction over time, and this is all over Baldwin, of black oppression and the worldview that blacks are in their position because they're inferior intellectually, biologically. That is at the core of it. Now, all of the institutions, be it the party system, the legal system, they all, and we could go through them one by one. The legal system over punishes black people, over sentences black people, especially black men, to the death penalty. You take we can take the political party system. So you can see a system. And by system, we're not just talking about the institutions, we're talking about the relationships of people, and not just individuals, but individuals, relationships of groups, dominant and subordinate groups, the relationships, you know what I'm saying? So a system, a social system, is this complex set of relationships. And I agree with you, Nuri. We have to account for white supremacy in systemic terms. Just to point, Donald Trump is a white supremacist. Well, Joe Biden was a champion of the crime bill that locked up 30% of young men, devastated the black community. Just a whole. So we're talking about agents and powerful agents upholding a system of white supremacy. We can call it a system of oppression, but no, more specifically, it is a system of white supremacy. And you're right, black folk have developed a social system in response to it. And it is, if we could talk more about it.
Can I ask a question related to this? It may sound like a very naive one, but I'm also trying to work this out. But would you say that in the current configuration of the white supremacist social system in the United States, I guess how do we understand the role of ordinary people and the part they play in that? Because part of the reason I ask is what the civil rights movement was able to do was to actually address, let's say, ordinary white people and say, you are participating in oppressing black people. And I think part of what I think also gets confusing for this time is let's say ordinary white people, ordinary immigrants, are they still oppressing black people? Is that the right language to use? Do we frame it differently, or is it the same?
Well, you see there, once you have the systemic paradigm, then you can investigate specifics within it. For example, one of the aspects of a social system are habits, assumptions. One of the things that the white supremacist social system produces and reproduces is a almost not even conscious. You don't even have to think about it, but you know you don't like Black people. You don't even have to think about it. You know, I'm threatened by a Black person. Just his very presence. You know, so that is, those are what we call, you know, Nancy, habitual things. Then, you know, at the level of the psychological, the social psychological. So all of this can be investigated, but I think we have to establish that there is a social system that is completely committed to the reproduction of Black inequality and white supremacy, although every white person doesn't benefit from it, but nonetheless, it is there. What it does, I think, in most cases for non-Black people is it creates habitual behavior, habits. You know, I only live in a white neighborhood. I don't want to live around Black people. You know, the assumption that all Black people want to be around you. White people have that assumption. Most Black people don't, you know, or the idea that everything in the white world, quote unquote, is better than everything that's not in the white world. That white music is superior. You know, you get this thing with white rock. You know what I'm saying? Like in our documentary, we didn't have no white people in there. Well, where you gonna find the white music to fit the revolutionary struggle? There ain't none. Well, okay, I ain't gonna say there ain't none. But even if it is there, it's not as good as what the Black people do, because they're singing about their freedom. Oh, excuse me for talking too loud. I mean, but so, and that's what Baldwin is. White people have imprisoned themselves in a cage, and they don't even know how they did it to themselves. And so the clarity, everything. Well, I'm not shut up. No, go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Forgive me.
Well, I think also what you said about habits or things being habitual, it means that it happens almost on a subconscious level, where you don't actually have to think about it. The whole point is that you are basically, I don't know, programmed to reproduce the system without being conscious of your role in actively upholding or perpetuating it. And I think that's also what you do see very clearly in the Democratic Party. And I think that's also part of the quality that makes it white supremacist, which is that without actually thinking about it, you do white supremacist things, but then also you have plausible deniability, where you try to say like, no, like I'm not white supremacist, I'm not a bad person, actually I'm a good person.
Well, but see, that's why it's so necessary to have the Black civil rights leaders speaking. Because then white people don't have to think about anything, and Black people, for the most part, so just shut up. It's vicious. It is vicious in its functioning, the way it functions.
Because I think part of why I ask the question is, how do you connect the systemic to the personal?
Well,
and but in part because I asked because
this is a big question in sociological theory. How do you and there are all kind of ways of doing it.
Because I guess I'm still using like the civil rights movement as an example. You know, part of what it did was, let's say with like the sit-ins, that is the conscious attempt to draw out white supremacy into the open, right? And I guess for me the question is, and that then poses the question not just to like, let's say the white rioters who come to like beat up people at the sit-ins, but it also poses the question to like all white people in the country. Are you like, which side are you on? And my question is how do we understand that today? Because I don't know if like the same, if you try to do the exact same thing that national citizens were trying to do, for instance, it doesn't elicit, I don't think it elicits the same response. And that's, I think, part of also where we understand the achievements of the civil rights movement and that things have changed to some degree. But part of what I'm trying to understand is like, what is the quality of the change amongst in the social system, but especially in terms of like how we understand the participation of ordinary people in that system.
Yeah, and that's the question that Baldwin was constantly asking.
Yeah.
That very question.
Right.
And that's what King was saying, a radical revolution of values.
Yeah.
Which is another radical revolution of thinking, of ideas,
Yeah.
Yeah. So my answer to that is both sociological and practical. From a sociological standpoint, those are questions that have to be that are kind of answered in studying situations. You know what I'm saying? But in the larger moral political thing, and this is Baldwin, we just don't know how white people will be moved. Will they be moved? Can they be moved? You listen to Sean Fain, you listen to these labor leaders. They ain't trying to change white people because they're waging a class struggle. But white people must be changed. They ain't going to be sudden, certainly gradually. And now Baldwin was addressing the macro, the large, systemic, this large population who is either hostile to Black people, as he was saying, or indifferent, or complete hypocrites like the white liberals that he talks about, or that King talked about. But, no, please go ahead, I'm sorry. No, but no one can claim to be a revolutionary and not be concerned with these questions, and we have to study them. They have to be studied, and this is why, as I've said before, I prefer sociology over political economy, because political economy doesn't even ask these questions. So,
Well, political economy takes for granted that the social system will reproduce whatever it's set up to do. That's what it has to take for granted as it's given, to focus on basically the material movements, because there aren't exceptions then, like the personal, human, social, Sorry, I just...
Yeah.
Well, the political economy also narrows essentially the worldview of people. And I think it's the same point that you were making earlier, which is that what are the lives that people are living, their struggles, their aspirations? And because ultimately those are important in the sense of individuals being agents of change for the future, if you're only considering a portion of their lives. And I think it was really this past DNC that helped me to realize, despite how the free school and other commentators have talked about the West, how powerful the ruling elite of this country is, how well oiled it is, how much money it is. Where on YouTube and all sorts of social media platforms, you see tons of ads, and you know how much money goes into buying feature-length ads. And then how quickly the New York Times, Financial Times, all these different news outlets are supporting Confronting. And recently with RFK is pulling out of the race, quickly the New York Times had its rebuttal, which is that him backing Trump will not impact the race. And so how is it that they're so able to, I think the way you described it, which is well-oiled, also speaks to how it won't just die out just because it's in a crisis. And it also pointed out how important words are. Because I was listening to this thing and I realized that without free school being a counter to these ideas, how easily you could believe, like, ordinary people could believe the words, where they seem to have so much conviction and moral authority. Obama's talking and he seems like he really believes what he says, of Biden being my brother, and this is a country of love and hope. And it's the same words. And I was like, oh my shit, it's a whole different reality.
Unless you actually have the history and the understanding, it's so easy you can fall into this propaganda and this machine. And even just walking around here before preschool, you see the signs of Kamala. How is it that people are so quickly willing and adapting to what the ruling elite is putting out? And I think that's where it showed how there really is a force to aside, or the importance of ideas and words in this ideological struggle. And even this thing of, what does oppression mean? Because I have been thinking a lot about the families that we come from and how, my family has come to this country not knowing Black people and having a certain perception of Black people, of the violence, of the poverty. And I think the way that you come to see it is that you can only really know by having a different narrative told, where everything in the society is telling you that this system works because it's kept to protect you from Black people. And that is the narrative told to immigrants. But what if there was something else, actually the truth of what is the struggle and the sacrifice of Black people in this country? And despite that, and I wouldn't, that has become extremely important because I think even with my father, I think because I'm always telling him about the preschool, his view of Black people has slightly changed over the years. And I think part of it is, I don't think he'll admit it, but part of it is that he's begun to notice certain things of Black people. I was like, Dad, if you can see it, Black people are also some of the kindest, most open people that you'll meet. And then now he'll strike up conversation with Black people. And he's something about Black people is that you can argue with them and they'll be very passionate, but then they'll actually work things out. Whereas with white people or immigrants in this country, through his business, he'll interact with these individuals. They'll stab you in the back. They might not say anything, but then they'll stab you in the back later. Or I guess I say this because what you said earlier, imagine not just a room full of people, but even 1 to 2 people, an audience of 1 to 2 people, the people in your life, actually convincing them. I think those are the most difficult. How would they respond? What are the questions that they would ask? How would they rebut? What are the examples they would use?
That's it, Al. That's it.
And
it sharpens your language, your sensitivity. And that's so important in making a robust case like the one we're making. I'm sorry, I didn't forgive me.
And even this thing of war as being white supremacist.
Yes.
Where
just because they are civilizational wars. Remember, we went through these are civilizational wars, against darker humanity. This is and so it ties in so neatly. If, for instance, in Gaza, if they were white, European, white civilization, it couldn't go on for a day.
That's why
Palestinian Arabs, you can kill all of them. You know what I'm saying? So these are civilizational questions. I'm sorry I didn't put that in when I said. Oh, I'm sorry. You go ahead. I talk too much.
And I was going to build on that, which is that it's also leading up to this election that people are revealing actually the worst of their beliefs of the world, where you'll hear things such as, you need a powerful America for a stable world. And, people who wouldn't automatically admit that they're white supremacists say those things outrightly. And what is that what does that lead to? Which is that you're essentially saying that America has to be strong and keep the rest of the world in its place.
Right.
And despite Trump having, we have given him the benefit of the doubt, whatever it is. But what he's saying is that these wars wouldn't happen. And so in substance, even though he might have white supremacists, still some contradictions, the substance and effect is essentially to pull America from being this big brother across the world. And yes, so many individuals, or just a handful of individuals, have said the thing of a strong America for a peaceful world. And it's so grotesque the way these people say it. And it's in public conversations, and I just question, how do you even say that without realizing actually what you're saying? And the other piece, which is that, I don't know, for some reason, the algorithm on Twitter has also brought up figures like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi, and it brings up those same feelings of essentially America saying that we can take out these leaders that have represented the sovereignty of their people, and instead America takes out these individuals and humiliates these individuals, like these good individuals. And I guess I make that point to say, like, in terms of even sharpening how I make this case of why war, like, what are the assumptions of war, and what do people believe about war and the rest of the world? Like, you can only take out darker humanity if you believe that darker humanity has bad impulses, that they're totalitarian, that they're savages, that they are less progressive than the West.
And that all of the progress that what we have made is white, as a result of white people. And darker humanity, including Black folk in this country, want to undo all of that. If that ain't white supremacy, I don't know what is. Go ahead, Sean. Oh, no, are you finished? Go ahead, I'll finish.
I think I wanted to start by saying that I was recently going over the science conference that we did as part of it. And I think that I'm slowly also starting to realize and recognize that one of the biggest goals of the Democratic Party, and by extension the US state, is this ideological and narrative hegemony seems to permeate not just in America but across the globe. And the event that we had at the same time as the DNC and what we have been doing all through the year of Baldwin is an attempt to puncture that goal. Like, that is an attempt to say that this is what they're doing. One of the things that we have to do is recognize it. When Kamala Harris speaks at the DNC and says that we will make the American military the most strong, and not just strong, the most lethal force in the entire world, that should say something. That should question one's assumptions about global humanity, war, and what they're going through. When and this is a very interesting thing that she said, and you can also find it throughout Biden's speeches, whatever he's given over the last three and a half years, is that she says that the world is basically, I'm paraphrasing, the world is split into good and evil. And we are the good guys trying to promote democracy all over the world, and the evil are the authoritarian regimes, which we will not allow to exist. That should also give you an indication of that is the definition of white supremacy. This imposition of something that you say is good, and then saying that everything else is bad or evil. And then this brings me to one of the points that I wanted to raise, which I think our DNC event raised, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit, which is the importance of standards. And I feel like if we look back at the history of America, when the Europeans came here, they came with those standards. They came with European standards. And if we think about the European standards of those times, that was what? That was white supremacy, that was war, that was taking over the rest of the world and its resources for, for this propagation of what would eventually be a white supremacist social system. But in the midst of that, you had Black people, even when they were imprisoned and enslaved, the beginnings of a different set of standards, a different social system. You had the Civil War and then Reconstruction. And I think what really concretized and sort of defined what those standards were, those alternate standards were, was King. King set a set of standards for this country that people could turn to as an alternative to whiteness, as an alternative to white supremacy. And I think it is very important to recognize that these standards exist. Black people embody these standards in their music, in their lives. And I think that this goes to the question of the immigrant. We've had a lot of people coming from outside America to settle here. And you have a group of immigrants like the Obamas, like the Kamala Harrises, who have come here. And I guess the first impetus is to feel lost because you want an identity in this strange land and you don't have one. And for that, to get that identity, you have to associate yourself to certain standards. You have to live up to certain standards. And you have two choices. One is the standard of whiteness and of white supremacy, and the other being the Black social system and the standards that King proposed. And when he said that you have to have a revolution of values, you have to live as if you will not be free till the entire world is free. Those standards as opposed to these standards. And of course, the leaders of the civil rights movement have been invisibilized. I don't know if that's a word, but anytime that you could appropriate a leader of the civil rights movement like James Baldwin, you throw them into identity, you throw them into queerness, and being a writer, just a writer, when we know that he was so much more. And if you can't do anything about appropriating their identity like Paul Robeson, you wipe them out entirely. With King, they tried to do both in a way, and I think that this recent movement to appropriate the civil rights movement as a whole is partly because they can't entirely appropriate King. They can't get him out of the minds of people, and I think that when other people come here who are Chinese, who are Indian, whatever, they also have this choice to make. What standards do I align myself to? And this is probably the most important thing that we've been trying to say, is that this is the moral choice. This is the moral imperative. This is the revolutionary imperative. And by choosing to not be white, you save yourself, I feel. You save yourself in a way. And that is the only kind of freedom that you can hope for. All of this talk in the DNC about freedom, are you really free to do anything that you want? Are you really free to say that I give up these standards of whiteness and I go against the Democratic Party? You're in danger. And accepting that danger, accepting that your life will not be this life of safety that America from a distance seems to be, is one step progressing towards that. And I feel like, and I'm taking from Baldwin when I say this, which is that everyone has the responsibility to accept ourselves as we are, and what we are products of the Black freedom movement. those who have been through it, those who are historically a part of it, definitely. But even the people who come here after the civil rights movement are also products of the Black freedom movement because, well, everything and everybody you see around you are products. And if you want to be a part of this society, you have to be a part of that. You have to be a part of that movement.
Yeah. I think we'll wait for that. Can read the comments. There's comments. Todd said good morning. Bambalai 7 said, of course the ruling elite is sophisticated. They've been working on crowd control for hundreds of years. Back in the 1800s, they had a horse and wagon. They sold snake wood. Fireplay says, I'm voting for Jill Stein. There are, I guess, a series of pro Jill Stein comments. Jill Stein 2024, Green Heart. Patty Lynn says, the American education system is really indoctrination and miseducation. And maybe that the DNC, I don't know what this is referring to, but it's a Hollywood production, American soft power. Bambalai 7 says, isolationism, imperialism, exceptionalism go around the world and manipulate regimes. Jill Stein is great. Two cheeks from the same ass, always the lesser of two evils, not much of a choice. They hire the best psychologists, scriptwriters, screenwriters, the definition of fakery. Rhonda Crump says, yes, these people are being hired to prepare Kamala for the September debate. Bambalai 7 says, seems that Obama was a subterfuge for the Democratic Party. Advoa Medusasi says, Prof. Doc is speaking to my heart. How can we ever trust Dems again after not letting Palestinians speak? We want justice and peace. We cannot have a democracy without it. Fireplace says, I would love to see a panel discussion between Saturday Free School and Revolutionary Blackout Network.
Why? Why are you so interested in that one?
And then,
If they could answer, I would like, if I could just ask, forgive me, why are you so interested in that one? I think that's, to be very honest with you, I think that would be child's play. You know, we're dealing with bigger issues, not people who are trying, well, I won't be too, they could respond.
yeah, that was like 2 hours ago, so we'll see. Well, 1 hour. M. Sparks also said, just commented, nations of sheeple begets the paper wolves. Bambalai 7 says, to have a country automatically implies that you care about your fellow countrymen. Todd said, Marxist-Leninist, quote, must trust the people, study the Marxist-Leninist lineage, but more importantly, know where that lineage was intersected with and surpassed by the Black freedom struggle. Rhonda Crump said, both parties get on code with whiteness. And then Richard H. asked if we could share the title of the book by Romare Bearden, and then said, thank you for this very nuanced talk, Dr. Montero. And then Bambalai 7 was just agreeing with the white social system and saying, yes, that is the reactionary property of the system. I think this maybe was in reference to like habitual reproduction of the system. And M. Spark said, supremacy is the weapon of the inferior. And then said, Bambalai also said, please continue on that thread, Professor. I was all ears. Please continue on that thread, Professor. I was all ears. But I think maybe that was something after the white social system. And then Patty Lynn said, the only way they, maybe white people, I think this was on like whether white people will respond or will actually do the right thing. The only way they can be moved is to make them realize this materially affects them. And then, let's see. M. Sparks said, my entire family is politically illiterate. 90% of the US people are also illiterate. It's hard to have hope. And then,
No, even to what Patty was saying, like, part of my question was, if we understand the system in its totality, but also in its complexity and its depth, that allows that allows you to actually develop a political strategy around how do you even articulate and present the contradiction to people in the way that, and how do you make it something that's real to them, as opposed to just an abstract thing. Because I think to me, in some ways, like the challenging thing about understanding the white supremacist social system, in part through like the habits and the subconscious, is like how to make that something which becomes an urgent political task to address, or urgent political contradiction to address for people. Because I think it's also, I know that we don't mean this, but oftentimes like the liberal narrative of the civil rights movement is just like, oh, like it changed people's minds about Black people, which is like also one, like not really true, but also I think removes like the systemic nature of it. But yeah, I think this is in some ways the ideological and scientific task that we're undertaking.
Oh yeah, and go ahead.
Wait, can I say something?
Just on this point, there are immediate and pressing ideological questions. By the way, all of these are not going to be solved so quickly, like the relationship between the individual and the overall structure, the belief systems and adaptation to them. But I think the most immediate one is the one that was taken up by the live stream, and that is war and white supremacy and how they are linked. And frankly, how the marches, the demonstrations failed, because they didn't know that not only are you fighting against the genocide, you're fighting against white supremacy. And so I think those are the two that the linkage of white supremacy and war, both as it affects the domestic situation, but as Shantanu pointed out, all of these wars against people of color, and it's just horrendous. And so as well. Okay, go ahead, English.
No. Well, I wanted to go back to like an idea from your remarks when you talked about how, like the question of what a democratic movement might look like at this time.
Yes.
And well, the question I wanted to ask is, like, what all of this means for our renewed objective with the year of Baldwin, or the project of the year of Baldwin as a deepening of the democratic capacity of the American people. Because, like, basically what you had said about how most likely we will not return to the model of a vanguard party where it is a minority of people that are expressing the aspirations of the people, but the taking up of the democratic or the ideological struggle itself by potentially tens of millions of people in this very country. Because I was thinking about this after what like Jeremiah you had said, and also Alice, because like with the DNC or what's happening with, let's say, like liberals or like Democrats in the country at this time, I feel like part of what Baldwin also puts on the table is, okay, like, well, we've said like Black people after Reconstruction, after the counter-revolution Reconstruction, after the Civil Rights Act are still not free, but inversely, like it's also clear that white people are
that the nation is not free.
And Democrats are not
That's right.
free. And
can I just say, I just want to go to the foot, because I don't want to forget it. I think, because this is a question of Jeremiah's all the time, and I know Porterbug too. What do you do with a population that is not yet at the level of ideological clarity, which would make for a revolution, but are at a much higher level than they've ever been in history? And how, how the American people are affected by the world's people, so on and so forth.
Right. Well, the other thing I want to put into the equation is like what we can draw from what we saw with like the young generation in the
Yes.
spring,
That's right.
Yeah.
and how they began to link, like,
I don't know.
you know,
We have to study it more. I'm sorry, forgive me. I think it
Yeah.
was a great achievement.
no, I feel like what I'm trying to say is that we're seeing evidence of what a new revolutionary
Yes,
democratic
I would
movement
agree.
looks like
I
in
agree
this
with
time.
that.
And
I
we're
agree.
seeing it with the year of James Baldwin and the people of Philadelphia.
Yes.
We also saw it with like the students and
Yes.
their morality and their intellect and like the ideological positions that they were beginning to take in the spring.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but I want to investigate that question.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, to Jerry and you, the concept of a movement of a new type rather than a party of a new type
Right.
is a way of expressing a greater confidence in the capacity of people.
Right.
And we in part conclude that from what the Third American Revolution achieved.
Yeah.
And that's our model, actually, whether they
Right.
say it.
Right. Well, because the question is also what the development of like a nonviolent struggle or nonviolent movement looks like in this
Yes.
time. Because specifically,
Or a movement of civil disobedience.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, because of what Jeremiah had said earlier, like it made me think about that King quote that I'm not sure if someone in preschool like mentioned it recently, but it was about how when there's like a severe wound, what you want to do is like basically open it up, like let it breathe,
Yes.
so that it can be healed by the natural forces of like oxygen and light, air. I forgot like what exactly that was from, but for me that idea is linked to this idea of Baldwin uniquely being the thinker that becomes the entry point for the surfacing and then also the reconciliation of like the burning contradictions or the most burning ideological questions at this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because part of it is like, I think I've felt this way for a long time, but I've increasingly felt that a lot of what we do in free school, especially in terms of public-facing stuff, I understand it's through nonviolence in a way. It's a different, also nonviolence of a different type or for a different time. But even this whole, like the whole Kingian approach of like, you have to bring the existing tension to the surface, like Michelle was saying.
Yeah.
Part of what we bring to the surface is like even the question of ideology itself.
Yes. Yes.
Like why, and this is not something which is alien to people, but is something submerged in people because, like, again, we recognize and understand that part of the crisis of this time is that the masses of ordinary people do not believe in the ideology of the ruling elite anymore. But the question is like, do they feel that ideology is theirs to actually determine? And I mean, yeah, I think that's part of how I understand it as like almost a nonviolent ethic in the sense of it's not just about the tactics of a protest, but like when we do like these public events, like when we bring people together, like into this church, for instance, like I see that as our contribution to what is the most necessary struggle for this time. And it's not something which is secondary, but actually we feel that what we're doing is the most politically urgent and is also in the truest attempt to do justice to how we understand the Third American Revolution. But yeah, I think, I guess I would say about the student movement, part of how I understand it is, it's not that it was something that was complete, but it did show a glimpse of what is possible when especially this generation of Americans pick up the mantle of the Third American Revolution. It's not coherent yet, but it's like, it does mean something that they were singing certain songs. And that even the whole concept of civil disobedience is something that leapt to the forefront of people's consciousness. And it's like, there's no place that comes from other than the civil rights movement. And then you can deal with all these questions of like, that we talked about last week in terms of Bangladesh and how, you know, civil disobedience has been kind of co-opted by the ruling class. And there's lots of things to work out. But it's like, the real rub, like the real substance of it is like, the reason why all these young people across the country were, in some ways, I don't know if they were prepared, but they were primed to
Yes.
immediately leap towards something which is basically like a non-violent strategy
Yeah.
through the encampments, however flawed it may have been, however incomplete it may have been, is because of the civil rights movement. And that is just a small inkling of what we think is possible in the country. And but that inkling or that glimpse is important.
I wanted to, I've been thinking about this ever since you brought that question of, the systemic nature of white supremacy, playing out through the white supremacist social system. How does the individual, how can the individual first recognize that they are shaped by the system and therefore it shapes their worldview? That also made me immediately think about the student movement, because one thing that was clear were these young people, they were basically negating some of these habitual and they were basically doing it because of the moral imperative, because when they saw the destruction in Gaza, the murder of all those children, it was clear that it's unconscionable to stand for something like that, stand with institutions that would do that. And it forced a certain investigation into the interior life or the moral standards of themselves, but then the institutions that were in charge of educating them or basically placing them in the society. And I mean, what happens with the student movement now that the classes start back up and the students are back on these campuses is a big question. It's hard to predict right now. And Lotus at University of Pennsylvania, this is precisely one of the questions that we are dealing with and engaging with in this moment. And while the future might not be completely predictable, something was achieved, a change in the mindset, that, oh, we are just going to go along and then, be good students and study and get to very lucrative careers or whatever. I don't think that is ever going to be possible again, because this thing was done at the most elite universities in this country. And this is something that we try to deal with in the science symposium. Where was I going with this? But again, I feel like what that tells me, and this might not be the complete answer, but what that tells me is that the way to expose the lies of this white supremacist social system, I think it starts with that moral imperative that Baldwin is always speaking to, that King always spoke to. And the task for this time is how to make it concrete, like Doc was also saying, to make it concrete and clear what the choices in front of you are. And the fact that the way you choose right now will determine not just the kind of person you become, but what kind of nation America, will either continue to be or transform itself into. And in relation to the whole world, and not just the American people, in relation to the whole world. And this is something else that I think we discussed in the live stream, was how, the Democratic Party, it has no way to defend or negate the accusation, the well justified accusation that it is the party of color revolutions and regime change all across the world. And like Alice was saying, this idea that anybody who does not fall in line with our vision of what the world should be is just undemocratic, authoritarian or whatever, and they have to be brought quickly back in their place. And I want to go back to something else that we talked about both today and in the live stream, this idea of, the DNC basically making an overt attempt to place themselves within the chronology of the Black freedom movement, right, by appropriating it. What this makes clear to anybody who has
not only that, but the suggestion or even now statement that they are the party of the Black freedom movement.
Yes, they are the party of the Black freedom movement, and they're the party of Black people right now.
Right.
Anybody who has been watching their record over these years, it is very clear that they don't have anything to offer. They don't have any solutions to offer to the American people about the things that they're struggling.
Could I ask you a question now? Just suppose that you were making this argument, what you just said, to a Bernie Sanders follower, who says Bernie Sanders' argument is that Biden adopted every part or most parts of my program that I ran on, including the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, these three big bills that in effect began to change the condition of the people. What would you say to that?
Well, I think what I'm saying is the fact that this is the party that has been in power in the last 4 years, and the fact that there is still, suffering among the American people, so much so that 70% of them would want a fundamental revision of the economic and political system, should be a clear indication that it has failed.
Let me just continue. They would say, well, look, those major bills, are about $3 to $4 trillion, and everything has not had a chance to kick in. So that's why the now Biden-Harris team needs a second term, because they have begun to change things, to change the society, and they would even, Bernie would say, even going beyond what Franklin Roosevelt did. What would you say? I mean, in a convincing, do you think that there's a convincing argument to say?
I think it's difficult for me to talk in terms of what bill the Democratic Party was able to pass.
But don't you think you have to? If you just said it, well, the Biden administration is a failure, they would say, well, look, how do you say this is a failure?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not saying just you, but I'm saying all of us. We have to answer those questions.
Yeah.
Take all of the trade union. Take Sean Fain of the UAW. Biden is the first president to join workers on a picket line. And then you take all of these bills that he's passed, and his commitment, frankly, to what they would call a social democratic agenda.
Yeah.
How would you? I mean, do we have an answer to that? For that?
Well, I can say something,
Go ahead.
which is that I think this argument is very flawed, because if you say that, okay, these three bills will take time to kick in to show results, how do you explain all the money that has been sent to Israel and is showing immediate results in the form of
They would
so
say,
much debt?
well, okay, go ahead. I'm going to be the devil's advocate.
No, go ahead.
Which is usually his role. Go ahead. Go ahead, Sean.
No, it is that how is it that when there is something that the American people don't want, that comes very quickly, that is affected very quickly, but then when it comes to relieving the suffering of millions of people who are, living an unfree life, that will take time, that will take a second term.
Well, I was speaking
No,
of.
but let me be the devil's advocate. They said, well, look, we reduced the price of diabetes drugs.
I can respond to this.
Just let me add another point. They would say, yes, the Biden administration, and I'm talking about a Bernie Sanders AOC person, would say, well, yeah, I disagree with that funding for Israel. I called for a ceasefire months ago. But and Bernie would say, what I'm confronted with is an administration that is going to be guided by 2025 agenda. And I have an administration which in social policy, this is their argument, has gone further towards changing the relationship of government to the people.
Want to go first?
Yeah. It's not too much.
No, I was thinking.
Well, I think part of it is that if that's the case, that the government or the state is for the uplift of the people, why is it that still all the major corporations and the money holders are backing the Democratic Party? And that includes something like the pharma industry. Because he loves using, and this is the most irritating because I actually know something a little thing about how the pharma industry works, but it's an example. Right? where they're saying like, we're bringing these pharma corporations, like negotiating prices, and we're capping insulin. But actually the pharma industry is not threatened at all. They're also some of the backers of the Democratic Party. And in the actual analyses of these bills, your Pfizer's or whatever, and I'm gonna get fired, but don't care. They are not threatened by any of these bills. And so, and that's just an example.
See, this is where we have to argue at the granular level. And I'm not saying because I'm the devil's advocate that I have the answers. But they have, you know, Bernie Sanders is not a very nuanced or sophisticated thinker. And he's bombed ass, and he's going to say, well, and they will say $3 trillion. This has not been done before. At least that's what they say. You know, but go
But
ahead.
if they're actually reining in these corporations, then why are these corporations funding them?
Yeah. Well, what they're saying is, see, and this is the social democratic argument. That's why Edward Bernstein, that as capitalism develops, it becomes more democratic, and hence
it can balance.
Yeah, it can balance. Hence, the class struggle is diminished in importance because labor leaders are brought to the table, and that in a democratic society, the elected officials have to respond.
Yeah.
And Biden is an example of that. And Bernie is an example of an Edward Bernstein argument.
Yeah.
But go ahead, Alice. That's what I'm being the devil's advocate.
Can I jump back in?
Okay, jump back in, and then Dwight, let her jump back in.
So, no, I mean, I understand the point you're trying to make, because this is the most difficult part of arguing about these things.
Yeah.
First of all, because we're not treating this as an argument, but then other people will treat this as an argument that can be settled by throwing facts in your face, numbers in your face.
Yeah.
Well, I think what I'm trying to say, and I'll do a better job of being educated on policy so that you have concrete things to. But what I'm trying to say is the idea that you have to wait, for these various, accomplishments of the Democratic Party to actually bear fruit for the American people, while currently, right now, the US government, this party is involved in arming Israel to the hilt to carry on this genocide of the Palestinian people. And also, when Biden was talking about Ukraine, I found this funny. You guys can tell me what you thought about it, but he was like, after 3 years, Ukraine is still free. Like, this was such a great accomplishment of his administration. But it exposes how little they think about human suffering and death and war, where just this idea that we have managed to prevent Ukraine from completely being taken.
May I interrupt you?
Okay.
I want to say yes. So now I think that your argument can be made, because now you will make the Martin Luther King argument that in every instance that that military spending and militarism undermines social uplift. And so I would say that you can make that, or you change the terms of the discussion, and I think it is necessary.
Yeah, you have to change the terms of the discussion, because I don't care how many progressive bills you get passed, if the net effect of the American state on the world is that it will still wage these wars, it will still continue to, try and instigate color revolutions. And Bangladesh is very close to me, so I feel very personally about it. But it's not even a personal question. The fact that you can do this, I think it negates the impact of whatever bill or whatever spending for welfare that you can
see. And I think that is, I appreciate the fact that you say that I don't have to know every detail of every bill and how these bills will go through the government bureaucracy. But I can make this on.
Right.
And I think this is the point. that the argument, and this is the Baldwin argument, the King argument.
Yeah, you're basically saying, just wait, things will get better. Just believe that, we have passed bills that are going to be good for you. Just like calm down and let us continue. Let us continue funding this genocide.
That's right.
Because
That's right.
one day these bills that we have passed will affect positively.
Because what the argument is, and I would say this is our argument, that more than a government of the people, this is a government of war makers.
Yeah.
The American regime exists for the purpose of war throughout the world. And that I think this is, if I could say, I think this is our argument. Of course, putting in there what Alice just talked about, but I think this is our case. This is the case we have to make.
Yeah. Can I say something very briefly? Oh no.
Can I finish my part?
Yeah. I'm not going to say anything very long.
Yeah, because I was trying to get somewhere else, which had to do with I think this reminds me of another thing I want to say is if all these policy changes or policy advancements that this administration was making was so convincing and compelling to the people, I don't think they would have to have worked so hard to appropriate the Black freedom movement to get some moral authority. I think that is what they were lacking. They're very aware of the fact that they don't have moral authority with the people, and the virtue signaling to Black people and the appropriation of the Black freedom movement is a ploy to try and have or to fabricate a moral.
Don't argue it to us. How would you? I mean, I agree with you, but how would that argument be made to the staff at, let us say, Emily's Union?
I'm getting to.
But use the language, and that could go ahead.
Why I'm saying this even is, when they talk about, when they make this overt sort of appeal to Black people and say that, oh, we are the party that really stands for Black people right now, and the Trump movement or Trump, they are the racists, or they have it. Oh, it's almost like they make it sound like the Trump movement is an anti-Black movement. But then the question of something that we discussed right in the beginning of today's conversation, but also in the live stream, the idea that there is no race war on the table. That is not the contradiction that we're dealing with right now, where Trump winning would mean, in some ways, going back on the gains of the Black freedom movement. This is the argument that they're trying to make.
But you make your argument.
But there is no evidence for that. There's no evidence.
Make the argument
for the fact that there's no
don't make it to. Well, no. I don't think that Biden has been the most progressive president in American history.
There's a lot of people who say
That's what they say.
Yeah. Well,
That's what they say. And that's what we have to argue against. If we say the Democratic Party is a white supremacist party, a war party, they will say, well, look, we had to fight certain wars because Russia invaded Ukraine and Hamas carried out rape and murder on October 7th. These were necessary. They would call them just wars. But in spite of that, they would say, well, look at these three major bills. I'm telling what is the argument? And don't make the argument to me. I'm a convert. I've been converted to your position. Make the argument to the most hard-headed social democrat staff at a union or person in one of these nonprofits. Make that argument.
I have to finish that.
No. I want her to make. Can you make that? If you can, it's okay.
No. If I can't, I will tell you I can't. But this.
Okay, well, make it then. But you've been avoiding making it. Well, I have to tell you.
But what I'm trying to say is that the conversation about whether the election of Donald Trump would be a threat to the democratic values of people, the whole thing of, see, now you put me on the spot, so I'm fumbling for my words. But what I'm trying to say is there is no evidence that suggests that there is going to be a racial confrontation if Donald Trump is elected.
But you're not, that's not the argument. The thing, hold on. You're looking across the table at a dyed-in-the-wool social democrat. Let us say the mayor of Chicago. He's a member of the Social Democratic Party, right? Social Democrats in America. And he'll say, I have a city to go. We didn't have money to fix the streets, to build infrastructure, to put new internet, whatever. And the Biden administration passed these bills. Okay, that's what he was saying. Now, I agree with what you said. Well, look, I don't know that all of that is accurate that you're saying. However, then what would you say to him?
Well, one of the things that keeps coming up in conversations when I'm trying to talk about this at work, and the question that nobody can answer is, why are Black people in such overwhelmingly large numbers leaving the Democratic Party right now after for decades having
Okay, that's one argument you can make.
Then that's sort of where I was getting to, is the fact that they needed to lean so heavily into deriving moral authority from the Black freedom movement was to address the abandonment of the Democratic Party by so many Black people who now open, we've said this thing about how polls cannot ever be a proper, just estimation of how people are actually going to vote, because for historically Black people, they don't always show all their cards before.
Okay. Now I'm gonna say this. I think you have made a argument, but you have not. This is just my own judgment. You have not sealed the case. I think that your argument would leave the jury would still be out. You know what I'm saying? You made good points, but you have not. Made a killer blow to the position. Let me go to Kathy.
I don't know if I have so much to say in terms of this is just an exercise that I find extremely illuminating, and I am appreciating we're taking this time to do such a thing, because one, I just wanted to say I actually don't think I understood the position of the Social Democrats, despite how heavily they have marketed themselves to young people, my generation, starting even from middle school and high school. We have been, I think, actually, I personally know that I've been the target of this kind of it is so natural, oh, you don't like the Democratic Party yet, you're already feeling you want to become a little more radicalized. Here's Bernie Sanders. That's how old I was when I think that 2015 campaign of his took off. But I just wanted to say I didn't really understand until I feel this moment how hard we have been going on this question of what exactly is the Social Democrat position as it is today, represented by the Democratic Socialists of America, by Brandon Johnson, but also by these legions of young people that we see show up to these rallies, but also are now in the position of seeing the DNC and having to whether make these choices, and sometimes many of them going along with this in the most appalling way. And I can include, and I don't know if my cousin's going to watch this, but she's a card-carrying member of the YDSA, and when she came in February, she was making these same arguments to me, and I was just baffled that somehow she agreed, genocide, red line. She walked out of her own graduation, and yet she's but Biden is the most pro-labor president, so what can I do? What can we do? And I was flabbergasted sitting across from her in my living room being I want to kick you out, but you're my cousin. I can't do that. But then the other thing is now I think with this exercise, I think there's also the question of the young people, not only of course the staff members of Emily's Union or a mayor of Chicago. I just want to include the people that I think we're all going to maybe encounter on Penn's campus and our reading groups, and also just that's why when you said just two people, when you speak, you have to think about maybe two people are even really close to you, but you have to sharpen language. I immediately thought of my cousin Vivian. The other thing is also that I wanted to mention is that I feel what I didn't really realize until I just pieced it together, but this is always what Social Democrats do back in Germany, no? To accommodate themselves to to be able to in during like I'm forgetting which World War I or World War II, but essentially, yeah, like it is easy to become then accommodate themselves to war while saying that they're the most progressive party in. Like I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but I'm
Yes.
going back through even the historical context you've previously laid out, and to say like even
But I
the
just-
track record has proven.
But you're
the way
absolutely right, and I'm just.
That's
But
all.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
that's
let
really
you, no. You are right. Edward Bernstein
Right.
and the Social Democratic Party of Germany made the argument that why should we jeopardize all of the social legislation that has been enacted for the sake of opposing our government's war? I mean, we have a stake in the system.
Yeah.
Okay, now, see, okay, let's go slowly through this.
Yeah.
See, part of the argument, let's say of your cousin or Brandon Johnson or any number of people, is that why should I abandon the stake that I have? I have to acknowledge, your cousin might say to you, look, Kathy, you can deny it all you want, but you have a stake in the system functioning well. You see what I'm saying? A Bernie Sanders would say, there are millions of people who have a stake in the success of this legislation. You understand what I'm saying? What argument would you make? Could you make an argument?
No, I mean, I can see why this is why they're like, I'm so pro-worker. This is why I have to stand behind Kamala. I can't take the people's internet, their diabetes, my medication prices from them. I can't do that. But really, actually, like, I feel strongly that I feel like this is, again, like, I am curious, like, whether this will seem like a good argument or not. But to me, this position reveals you're willing to put up with so much. That that's genocidal, but also just like the fact that the Democratic
So
Party.
you would make this is
Like,
also, you all would make a moral case.
I'd say, like, what else would you be willing to like give and like accept in terms of crumbs? Even if they are very material, they are very essential to a suffering people. But don't forget the suffering is very much caused by the Democratic Party. Even before this genocide, so many cities, states, counties, and then I was talking about like entire countries have been run down to the ground by the Democratic Party, and for them to then sprinkle like these things, like what else would you be willing to accommodate?
Okay, so you're making a Baldwin argument. What is the price of the ticket?
I guess you could say.
What is the price of this type? Let me let Eddie. No. Go ahead, Dwight. You had your and then Eddie.
Well, the couple said you guys are talking about so many good things, but I want to talk about, say, we're talking about capitalism.
Wait a minute. You're trying to make a case now.
For what?
No. The case that we began with was that the Democratic Party is a white supremacist party.
Right.
And so I asked them, so that case, we can make that case here. Purba can argue the case, and she doesn't, I'm convinced already.
Okay.
But how do you make it a hypothetical social democrat who says, well, why should I abandon the progressive economic and social policies of the Biden administration over the question of Gaza? Or what you claim, you meaning us, claim about Black freedom. Y'all saying Black people are not free, but Black people are doing better now. This is not me talking. Better now than they've done in over 50 years. At least that's what they would argue. Yeah, I'm talking about the Democrats, the social democrats, the so-called progressive liberals. So we're trying, how do we argue? How do we make our case convincingly? Now I will concede that Kathy and Purba have made pretty much the moral argument. What is the price of this ticket? But go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking that they would make the argument that they have co-opted your view. For example, you were talking about, say, capitalism. I'm talking about capitalism. They would say, for example, Social Security was once a common in this United States. The communists argued for Social Security. Franklin Delano Roosevelt embraced it. So capitalism has a way of modifying itself to adjust to our problem. So it takes the wind out of my argument. Medicare, 1965, we didn't have that. All these. So what I'm saying is that the system has a way of co-opting ideas, and revolutionary movements are very slow. So I guess what I'm saying is that you, like your cousin who said, what she said, that Biden
was pro-labor president.
Right.
Like, oh, Trump will just kick
Right, because what did Biden do? What did Biden do? He was right there with the workers, and that takes the wind out of my argument. And that's why, another thing, what does Biden do? Why? I've heard this. Biden's the most progressive president. Why? He's got an LGBT person, he's got blacks, he's got a Sikh, he's got a black, he's got a woman. You can't, in other words, what I'm saying, a large percentage of the population is sort of like a superficial thing. And your
point is strong. Your point is strong. And let me just clarify it, and because then I'm gonna let you continue.
Right.
So your point is that capitalism, which is the point of Edward Bernstein, has the capacity democratically to adapt.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying? Now, the question is that is a social democratic argument. The question is, has it?
Well, the proof that it has is
that we got Social Security.
I mean, that's a form of it. I mean, the people. I'm not talking about you. We can argue whether how valid it is, but I'm talking about what the people think. And once the welfare system, all of these things, once they start affordable housing, this takes the wind out of some of the arguments. But the lived experience is what's important. The lived experience was, if I'm living in a country where they are giving me Section 8, I'm not, what you talking about? I'm gonna say, what are you talking about? I'm living good here. I got food stamps. And the other argument that they give is,
I've been on food stamps. I don't say that. I'm living good if I'm on food
stamps. What I'm saying is that I have something to survive on.
Yeah.
I didn't have this in my country. So now I'm coming to America. You know, I mean, look, I'm saying this is the hidden thing. Like, okay.
But how would you respond?
I'm not speaking as that's my position. I'm sure I'm speaking, I'm giving a description of what people think and how they see it.
So how do you think?
Well, okay. Now,
see, that's
well, how do I think is that it's superficial, and that what you're doing is questioning something deeper. I'm agreeing with what you're saying, but people, I'm saying this is what I'm describing what people see, and they have to look at it in a deeper level. Is what you're doing here. That's what I'm saying. So
and so each of us are responding to how would we respond to what you just said? So how you
respond? How I would respond to that is that, see, I'm aware that movements don't move like this. They don't move. They move like increments, you know. And so I would have to take the road that you would have to keep struggling. In other words, to try to get people to understand where their position is and how when you're talking about how superficial it is, how it really isn't helping the masses of people. You have to keep pointing to the concrete situation in Philadelphia, Newark, New Jersey, whatever, and keep struggling and showing that this is what you're doing. But you're talking about convincing someone. That's where the convincing is, when you have these programs on Baldwin, etc. So, you know, but I'm telling you why it's so difficult to convince the people. Because every time you say, like if you give them some, for example, the Democratic Party, I went to the 1984, forget Jesse Jackson. I was there. I was there. I was amazed because I said I never seen so many black people involved in the Democratic Party. I went there, and and Tony will tell you, since we were kids, when you look on TV, every party there was just a sea of white people. It's so different now. And so the context of time, you saw the Democratic Party, Chinese, a Sikh guy with a hat, all that. I mean, we're living in different times. So the consciousness of the people are different. And we have to address the situation differently, because this is not 1950. This is 2024. And so I guess. Okay, let me let Eddie. Anyway, go ahead.
But I would say that in the context of, let's say, certain social programs and social spending, I'd make the case that the Democratic Party in Philadelphia, for example, is a party of white supremacy that is meant to oppress the people, especially black people, by extension, all people. I'll take, for example, what I see in my neighborhood. Let's say they closed down Bach High School, they turned it into a coffee shop, they turned it into a bar. They have made the housing has gotten expensive. People are being driven out. Some people are ending up on the street. Other people, I don't know where they're ending up. And so certain material conditions, you could say, are not being met. But moreover, the human condition of what a human being deserves and human dignity is not being met. And that's why I see so many people drinking on the sidewalk. That's why people shoot each other on the buses. That's why I remember in Ramadan there was a shooting that happened at a Ramadan celebration, and so the human being themselves, the value of that human being's life is diminished to the point where this person doesn't value their own life, and they don't value other people's lives, and so they're willing and capable of throwing theirs and other people's lives away. And this let's say doesn't necessarily affect me directly, and I don't feel this way, but seeing it and relating to it, the relationship that I have to people that are suffering, on the one point it diminishes me because it weighs down on my conscience and my soul, and the other time I have to kind of protect myself from this, not that this person is inherently evil, but this person can do damage to me and other people, and this colors the way that I have to move through the city and relate to other people. And so even when those, let's say, concrete manifestations, physical conditions are not there, the mental condition still exists. And so a certain way of thinking arises that makes you unfree and makes other people unable to be free. And whether you're starving or not, even if you have, quote unquote, your physical needs met because you're not starving, I would say that a human need cannot be fulfilled under this kind of government in the city.
Yeah. I'm going to say that's a good point, and I think that he made several points. That's enough. I think what you just said is what's important about what you're doing here, because that's where, as you say, the Black leadership class is missing. That you're seeing.
But Dwight. See, but can I go back to your argument, to the extent that you wanted to make one, was that capitalism can
it does.
Okay, I'll say does buy the people off through food stamps, Section 8, Social Security, Medicare, and that irrespective of what we say, they see a better life for themselves.
Some.
Okay, enough then, we'll put it that way.
That's right.
What Eddie said is that just in his neighborhood in Philadelphia, he sees human devastation and ruin.
I see it too.
Okay, but hold it. Now I think he's made one of the best arguments today. You understand what I'm saying? And that, okay, I don't know about all these bills,
Right.
but I do know what I see.
Well,
Yes.
right.
Go ahead.
I want to, and that's true. When I in New Jersey, all this gentrification.
But wait a minute, Dwight. Yes, it's true. But I'm trying to ask you. But you were, I thought, making an alternative argument to what you saying. Well, y'all can say what you want, but you're up against a situation where people have things that they've gotten from the government.
That's right.
Well, hold it. If that's right, but then what about what he said? It does not look like that on the ground.
Well, and I'm not. It does not look like that on the ground for some of the people. That is for sure. I'm saying for I mean, like, I don't want to read statistics. You know, that more black people moving out of the inner cities. We both know that. We know that because we know from people where we come from, black farmers, etc. So yeah, there is a suffering group in America, and I'm not saying you shouldn't address that. I'm saying that all I'm saying is that the struggle must be addressed. That's all I'm saying. And I agree with what you're saying, but you can't overlook the co-optation that has happened.
For instance, Dwight. What makes you think we're overlooking? We're not overlooking anything. No, nobody in this room. We're trying to think about how to be more effective in our arguments. If I went on WRD today,
go ahead.
You know, or if I had a debate with one of the politicians or one of the people on URD, and I said, the Democratic Party is not the party of black people in this election or any other time in the last 40 years. And they would go up in there, what do you mean? And I would have to make an argument. I would begin by making an argument similar to what Eddie has just said, you know, that look at what we see. You don't have to convince us that we have to struggle. We meet here every Saturday. We believe in that. Right. I would make an argument like Alice has made, and then then I would make an argument similar to Purba and others. What is the price of the ticket? What is the price of all of this? If it's so good as you say, if you all are addressing the needs of the people and all these trillions of dollars, why do I still see in Philadelphia ruin and devastation?
Yes.
All right. Well,
yes.
I mean, there's nothing. Okay, no. I understand what you're saying because you know I come from Newark, New Jersey. I've seen it. Or you come from Philadelphia, etc. And I agree with what you see. But what I'm saying, I guess what I'm saying is that even the mayor of Philadelphia comes from poverty. And I'm not talking about it, but you know, justifying her actions. What I'm saying is that how do you go about that? Do you make what kind of policies do you have? I would say, what kind of policies do we have? What kind of policies would you have to change the system? What kind of policies would we have? That's what I'm asking.
Well,
what kind of policies would we have?
Well, I think part of it is it's confusing sometimes because I know that you're making the devil's argument, but then sometimes we're not sure if you actually believe the devil's argument. I think that's where I get confused in terms of what you're trying to intervene in, because it sounds like you'll be like, oh, like I'm saying what other people saying. But then like, as you talk, it just sounds like that's what you also.
Well, no, hold on.
No, I'm just saying it's like when I listen to you, that's what I get confused about. I don't know what you really believe.
No. Okay. No, I say that because, as you know, when you have to present to get to an argument, you have to see the other side.
Yeah, that's what we've been doing for the past like
now. I acknowledge that when Eddie gave the perfect description, I agree with your description. And I feel, and I have that same emotions whenever I go to New York or whatever, when I ride the subways, I feel all that, the homelessness, I see black people, etc. And for me, I see a little change, not much change. And so I say to myself, and why I come here, of course, is to get information, get ideas. And I say to myself, well, how do we affect that change? How do we affect that change? Do we affect it through the political system? which way do we get? And I guess I'm repeating myself, but what I'm saying is that I'm still looking for answers how to change it. And so, do we have policies? I'm asking, what are the policies that are needed to change?
But that's not what we're talking.
Well, that's not what you're talking about.
No, but why would you take us away from what we're trying to understand, right?
I'm not trying to.
Yes, you are. We are not, we asked the question.
Go ahead.
We asked the question, how to more effectively make our arguments.
Mhm.
And we were saying, look, we can talk generally about the part, this, that, and the other.
Mhm.
And we were trying to get more specific,
Right.
and Eddie and Alice
Mhm.
gave us specific things to show that all of these claims, yada yada yada, about how good things are, and how, when you get
I'm listening.
when you get right down to it, it doesn't look like that. Oh, go ahead, Al.
I think actually what I can hear what Brad is saying, because what you're saying is actually part of this back and forth exercise that we're having, because what the social democrat, and this is similar to actually what Jeremiah is saying, because what you're saying is that you recognize that there needs to be struggle, but at the same time, the way that you think about struggle is through policy changes. And that's actually very similar to the social democrats, where they feel that change can happen within the current political system. And what we're trying to argue actually is that there needs to be a radical revolution of values of the entire system, of the entire social system. And just let me finish. And that's why, and in the very beginning, when we started this conversation, we also defined what revolution means. And that means power, like where is power centralized? And currently the way that the system is that it's centralized among the ruling elite, the wealthy of this country, whatever it is that you describe it. And that's why I think it's confusing, because you're saying that these are the views that other people hold.
But then it sounds like that's what you also believe.
But then your solution is policy. How do we change policy? And what we're trying to say is, actually, we need people to feel empowered, to feel responsible, to feel morally changed, to actually take power. And that's not the same as policy changes.
Okay, I agree with you about particularly about excuse me, clarification.
I'm sorry.
Clarification. The revolutionary of value. When you said that, that's what I want to see change, the whole value system in the whole country, and that will, as you said, the system. And so when you say the system, what kind of system can we imagine? What kind of system?
And that requires a precondition of people actually changing. We won't know what form. Finish.
No. I understand when you talk about the revolutionary, about values. That's what I want. When King talked about the values, and somehow you cannot get that change of value necessarily in the present system. I agree. In the present system, you can't get that change of value because of the way people think. So in other words, I'm agreeing that there needs to be a revolutionary change in the values of the people. How do we get there? I don't know.
And it's not policy.
Well, it may not. Well, no, policy. No, see, policy is one of the ways that you get there. I would disagree with that. And the reason why I would say that, because policy turns into actual concrete action. So when you say, like, when you change the policy of housing discrimination, or when you change the policy of immigration in 1960, the Heller Act, where they let people come into the country. So policy does, I'll stick by that, and policy actually does change the concrete situation of a country. I mean, the policy of integration, it changed and made us integrate.
So is policy sufficient for you to support the existing system?
No, policy is not sufficient. That's what I'm saying, is policy is not sufficient. Policy is not sufficient. So when you make me, how it's called a straw man, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying.
But
so,
what's confusing is, you say that you don't believe the straw man argument or like the devil's argument,
right.
But then as you talk, it sounds like you're talking yourself into believing that argument.
No,
And that's what's, I mean, I don't know, like, that's just what's confusing to me because,
Yeah.
like, we're trying to get underneath it
But can I?
to address the actual assumptions that are at play. But it's like, when you, like, because earlier you're like, oh, like, what is the policy that you're proposing? That's where it gets really confusing for me because you're like, oh, what policy you're proposing? But then later on you say, oh, I'm not talking about policy. So it's like, I don't know what you really believe.
Okay.
That's what's hard for me to process.
Okay,
and I get confused.
Right, let me let Purva come in and come back.
I mean, you know, just going back to the thread of the conversation, because I think we are trying to build like ways, a new language of talking or clarifying, you know, what it is that we're dealing with and how we're going to deal with it. And I think this question of policy does come in, and you can make a case for policy being important and having, you know, a real benefit to people, but that only happens when the state actually has a social contract with the people that it honors. And what Eddie was saying is evidence that it is not. We don't have a state that honors any social contract with the people of America. And more clearly, it violates that contract with Black people. And this is the reason why a lot of Black people are leaving the Democratic Party after having been, like, you know, that sure shot voter base that the Democrats have always pivoted to or relied upon. And that is also the reason why they have to go so hard on this "we are the party of Black people" narrative right now, because they know people are losing their belief in that. There's tangible evidence of that no longer being true. And so they have to create, all they can do is, because they're not really invested in a systematic restructuring of the party, all they can do is restructure the narrative. And that's what they're trying to do, you know?
Right.
And you know, because it's all about narratives, if you look at the DNC, what? Oh, sorry, sorry.
Go ahead.
You know, when you look at the DNC, you see that, you know, their main thing is, it's not even like, oh, this is the vision of America we hope to achieve in the next 4 terms.
Yes.
It's all against Trump. It's all against defeating the opposition. It's not really what you are going to do and change yourself, transform yourself as a political party to, again, honor the social contract that people can see being violated over and over every day. And in some ways, it's like, again, this is not part of the argument per se, but this is more of what we feel, because we've been engaged in, you know, studying and then bringing the values of the Black freedom movement to the present moment, because we believe that this is how the next stage of the revolutionary process of this country will be taken forward, by studying it, by deriving from what it had gained, the achievements that were made. But what the Democratic Party is doing in terms of this false narrative that they're pushing so hard, that, oh, we are the party of the Black freedom movement. They don't ever mention King, by the way. In all 4 days, there was no mention of King, no mention of Lawson, this great revolutionary who just, you know, passed, and all of that. Even in the choice of who they choose to highlight, you can see that there is, you know, an actual disconnect between them and that Black freedom movement that they're trying to appropriate. But in some ways, this is so insulting, because it's a renewed effort to make Black people cogs, like indispensable cogs in the Democratic Party machine, where what you're basically saying is, oh, because all of these people we are highlighting from the Black misleadership class were rushing to, like, endorse Kamala Harris, because they're doing that, all Black people should automatically, you know, fall in line, or, you know, they are the problem, you know. But that was my initial point that started all of this. But I don't know. I hope that's, like, logically clear.
Well, I have. No,
Let me let Dwight, you want to respond?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Nate, I'm sorry.
No, it's cool, man. I mean, I feel like this just goes back again to, like, when you're arguing things, like, what is even getting to, like, what people's conception of freedom is.
Yeah.
Because if your conception of freedom with Kamala state is these small individual liberties for a few people, or these policy changes which don't have any real effect on the hearts of people. Because I mean, Baldwin has a pretty good account of history of the effects of policy and the effects of good intentions, if you will, on Black people in this country, when he talks about immigration, how long that took for really no substantive changes, or when he talks about the creation of ghettos for people and what that did to any of that stuff. So when you go into like what your touchstone for reality is, you know, what Eddie says, what Corbett says, being like, is it actually the health and the well-being and even the spirit of the millions of people in this country to be able to have an effect and have a purpose in life and have power to change their situation? You know, is that when it goes to what you believe for the rest of the world to have that same power and have that same cooperation? You know, I feel like that's why we always return to the child anyways, because that's the whole point of it. That's what reflects, you know, the state of the country and the state of people, you know. And I feel like also that's something we can't be afraid to interrogate either, is why we understand that the ruling elite also has this pathological personality and ideology, but also, yeah, why do people fall behind that, you know? And I think that's something that we can't be afraid to go to anyway either. And I mean, we're kind of getting there too. People do have a stake in certain things. People do have certain fears. But I think that's how you most clearly, and I think also that's how Baldwin most clearly makes the argument for why he even has that power, is because he asks you personally, why do you, and even King's nonviolent practice, right? It's not even just for white people, it's also for Black people. Like, why do you accept this system of oppression? And what's it gonna take? You know, are you gonna stand up? Are you gonna make a sacrifice? Or not? You know, and I feel like that's kind of what we're trying to get at, is that there's things underneath all of this, and there's higher power at play.
Right. Well, let me let Sean come.
Well, I think this entire conversation reminded me of something that we were talking about, which is, you know, a movement of a new type versus a party of a new type. And this does go back to our discussion about how white supremacy is systemic, and which is why a party of a new type, it's not effective if the system is the same. If it's a white supremacist social system, no matter what kind of party, what kind of policy you might want to enact, it has to be, like Alice was saying, a movement that tries to, you know, erase the systemic nature of oppression. And I think that what Nathan was saying was really relevant, because, you know, Baldwin, when he talks about, you know, he used to go to every single one of these protests for, in the South, where they were protesting for getting Black people on the ballot, like getting them votes. And he writes that, I know that me protesting, or even if Black people get the right to vote, it won't really mean anything right off the bat. It won't immediately enact some policies that are going to be for the good of Black people. What it means is more ideological. The fact that they have the vote means more than what they vote for or what the vote amounts to. I think that is the message that now we have come to a place where we can say that no matter how much you try treat us as unequal, we are equal. And I do want to go back to that point that we were making, Doc, that, okay, if somebody like Brandon Johnson of Chicago says that I have two choices, I can either go for these progressive values of the Democratic Party or this Project 2025 fueled Republican Party. Well, I think this is one point that I have a very just a very reaction to, is that why does and I think that Purva was talking about this, why does your argument have to be vote for us because the other side means the end of democracy and the end of humanity? Why does it have to be a threat? Why does
But isn't that the argument that we are making though about the Democrats?
Well,
in some ways we are, because we're saying the Democrats pose an existential threat to humanity. I'm not saying that that's not true, but I think it's. Are you opposing the rhetorical use of like the threat, or are you opposing it?
I think I am opposing the historical use of the threat. I mean, it's been like 40 years that the same thing has been. This has been the major argument of Democrats for a long time, and I think that we are making the argument in a different way, that where we have brought into consideration the possibility of nuclear war, the possibility of the erasure of history almost, and that is not the same way that they use it. It's a very surface level argument where they're saying that, which is not backed by any real evidence. And I think that if that is the only argument that you have to present, then that I would call as the straw man. Like that is what is meant to subvert, that is meant to distract, and you sort of move focus from the real issues. Like the mayor of Chicago can say that I need to provide food, water, housing, and electricity for all the people of my constituency, but also getting $2.6 million in donations every year, majorly from unions, which is funded by, again, from Zionist money, from Soros money. It's not hard to trace these things. So if you were really interested in the well-being of the community, and if you want to get into numbers, we look at crime statistics, they're up every year in Chicago. If you look at gentrification statistics,
can I ask a question?
Yes.
Because I think you have to address what Jerry is saying, at least in form, if not in substance.
Yeah.
We're arguing the same way the Democrats are arguing, except they're arguing against Trump and them. We're arguing against them. Or are we? What would you say, Jerry? I mean, did you see what he's saying? I think you got away from it.
Well, I mean, I raised it because I was realizing that as we were talking, because I agree with you. I do think that the Democrats, and I think all of us feel that the Democrats are like an actual concrete existential threat to humanity. But part of it is like, on one sense, you have to be able to back it up with actual evidence. And we've talked about the evidence a lot, which is, like even just recently, the Biden administration saying, or approving of a plan to basically wage a nuclear war. Like, China, Russia, North Korea. But I think the substance of it too, though, is what we've been trying to work out for the past like hour and a half or 2 hours. I think there's a difference between even just how we talk with each other in preschool, as opposed to when we actually are trying to make a case to people. And I think part of what the roundtable discussions that we had, and maybe some of the awkwardness and the difficulty, especially on the first day, that I felt was
Right.
Like, how do you distinguish between just when we're also trying to like, because I feel like in free school there's a lot more room for us to just like kind of freely work things out.
Yeah.
And we're even just trying to understand like what's happening in the world, like what's happening in the country. And like we can be a lot more almost like speculative in how we talk sometimes because we're trying, we're trying to work out ideas which are very complex and also at the same time have a lot of stakes. But there's a difference between that, I think, and this is part of what I was struggling with even during the roundtable. There's a difference between that as opposed to when you're making a political intervention and actually trying to speak to people.
Oh yeah.
And
in
that sense, that's also the difference between your concept of the American people in the abstract versus in the concrete. And this is part of what I think Baldwin does so well, which is he talks to you as like an actual person. And when he talks like about Black people, he's like, I'm not talking about like an abstract people. I'm talking about like a man, like in New York City, for instance. Like he makes that move a lot. And I think that's part of like our general, like, I think this is like what Doc was saying, this is like our general political maturation process. Like it is like, it's very helpful for me to be like, okay, like I'm trying to imagine I'm speaking to like a specific person. And what I've also found like the most interesting actually over the past like few years is like, oh, how would I make this argument to like a Trump supporter? Specifically like my dad, for instance. And that also changes, you know, depending on who you're talking to. But I think going back to, I guess, the question I raised to you, which is a question I also raised for myself, because I'm not exactly sure if I have the best way of answering it, but part of it is, you know, obviously there's a level of urgency that comes with what we think is a very real possibility of nuclear war. And at the same time, we have to carry ourselves in a way which is not basically reproducing the kind of pathological panic that that so many of the Democrats feel about Trump, whether or not it's even real. But like, you know, our whole thing is that it's not just this posing of Trump as an existential threat, whether or not you think that's true, it's that produces a kind of like, again, kind of like social panic, a kind of paranoia that I think comes through in terms of how they talk about it. And I think we have to be not completely cool and detached, but we have to be able to convey the urgency of what we think is actually at stake without kind of devolving into just like, oh, like, it's like, oh, nuclear war, therefore, like, therefore you're on my side. You know,
I've mostly heard Trump being described as a threat to democracy. And I think that that is different from what we're saying is an actual physical existential threat. And a threat to democracy, then we have to come to the question of what is democracy. And I think that democracy is defined in a very different way by the ruling elite than how it is. You know, like and I think that what they're saying that Trump is a threat to democracy is what it really means is that we won't be able to control the rest of the world like we do now. There won't be global domination and hegemony
Well, can I say just one thing?
Yeah.
You know, I think there's an assumption that, because they also use freedom, that democracy as they understand it is the equivalent of freedom. But I just want.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that we are making, because I had a little time to think about.
It was a condition for freedom. That's
condition.
That democracy, because they make two arguments: democracy and freedom. And I think what they're saying is that democracy and democratic institutions are a condition for freedom. If Trump is attacking democratic institutions, he is thereby also attacking the conditionalities for freedom. Although they would say he does that separate, but the democratic argument is connected to the argument about freedom.
Can I
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I think this question is really interesting, like just continuing
Speak up a little bit, Chris.
Yeah, just continuing the thread of like what is the role of ordinary people? And so much of it is based upon like the ordinary people you interact with. So yeah, coming back from the West Coast, like I've been thinking a lot about how the people of the West Coast kind of fit into all of this. And something you were saying earlier, Doc, about division, division, disinterest, cynicism, like in a way, the world of the West Coast feels so separate from the world of Philadelphia, where you can walk around in your neighborhood and see the very stark collapse of society in Philadelphia, but it's much less obvious in the West Coast unless you actively seek it out, unless you really know what you're looking for. And that's why I think Baldwin is so important, but also why like bringing the tension to the surface, bringing ideology to the surface, and also the moral question to the surface. It's not just like ideology's sake, but the role ideology plays in shaping a person's moral compass. And yeah, I'm just thinking also a lot about how like Baldwin, when he went to LA to produce that like Malcolm X film, and how he himself, it was impossible for him to make a separate piece where he says, you know, like it just wasn't in me to make a separate piece. It's not in me to forget everything I know. And I think that is what happens is once the truth is revealed, right? Like once you see that neighborhood in Philadelphia, once you walk through the streets of Philadelphia, you can't unsee it. And it makes you have to take up a certain level of responsibility. So I also think that the moral appeal is in some ways the universal appeal, because like you can't, like I don't think like when you talk about politics from a bills or policy standpoint, like it essentially you're just arguing you know, about people's individual self-interest. And like it kind of goes back to something that you said on a podcast episode about how like moral questions cannot be boiled down to individual questions about self-interest. It actually boils down to what you are willing to sacrifice. And I think that's the only thing, like that's really the heart of it, is it not? Yeah, but you know, I'm thinking about how like the first time I came to Philadelphia and how I felt like I was like jolted awake. And part of it was when I forgot, I think it was Emily who said like, if I could vote in such a way where every single vote I made was in the interest of the children of the world, you know, I would do it. But the answer is actually that we can't do it. It's like, it's actually not, it's not so simple. And it is because the system is so convoluted and so deep. But you have to ask, you know, that is essentially what we're trying to strive for, is like in every instance in which like the dignity and well-being of the next generation, of world humanity, and of the children of the world stands in opposition to the system of profit and of war. Can you stand for the former? Like, can you stand? Will you stand? That's really just the basis of it, isn't it? Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? You said the moral question is the universal question. Could you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, part of this is coming from like how I've been trying to appeal to people in California, and unfortunate thing, and I'm definitely guilty of this. I mean, I survived like 20-something years doing this. Is like not even thinking about politics whatsoever.
It's not even
not think about politics whatsoever. And like that does something to you, right? Like the price of the ticket. There is a price, obviously, and I feel like in a way that's also what I'm trying. Like you can just slide past all of the concessions that people are trying to make, like the excuses that people are making for the Democratic Party, the social Democrats. Like you can slide past all of that when you confront someone who actually just doesn't give a fuck whatsoever, and is solely like selfish, cynical, ignorant, blissfully ignorant, actually. The hedonism of a lifestyle that a place like California can give you, the veil that you just like are under, and how can you just like break out of that spell, I think is the moral appeal. Like, do you think it's right
do you think this is right? Do you think like, do you think the war, like, you know, do you think this genocide is right? You know, is there, what excuse can you make, really?
Well, I mean, I think in addition to that, because I went to California and I can understand how it's like, you know, by the water, places are by the water, it's like very idyllic and beautiful, and you can avoid a lot of what's happening in Philadelphia or in like cities like Philadelphia. But I don't even think it's just a question of war. I think it's also, you were pointing to it, which is in the lives of these, like that our generation in California are leading, where, I mean, for example, one that we talk about is young Asian men in the society. Even if they're not in a city like Philadelphia, even if they're in like the tech industry, what are the psychological, spiritual forces and attacks that they feel and may not have the words for. And so, because I guess the reason why I say that because is a sense that it's entirely, there's an assumption that they're not affected by what goes on in the rest of the country because they live in an idyllic bubble. But I don't think it's an idyllic bubble. And I actually, it's maybe idyllic, but it may not be a bubble.
I think you're absolutely right, Alice. Well, I think in a way that's part of the breaking of the veil, or like the truth that needs to be revealed, is that like, could you say that I'm just picturing someone in my mind I went to college with, like, you're making six-figure salary, but why is it that you're making a six-figure salary, but why are you so depressed? You know, why do you feel like there's something so missing from your life? And can you be honest enough with yourself to say that you are not happy, or that this is not the life that you strive?
This is why a lot of California tech Asians gravitate back towards Christianity.
Yeah.
At least from what I've seen, based on like my immediate exposure to like the relatives.
But I want to say what you said about and what I said, conscious and what Eddie said. Eddie is living and seeing what's happening, and you have to be conscious to know what he knows. Whereas if you're living in California or the suburbs somewhere and you never experienced that, it's like unknown to you. You don't care, and then I guess that's what I'm getting at, is that when you were talking about how changing things, that's what's important. Eddie sees it. A lot of people don't, and you pointed out a lot of people don't.
There's not actually making a different point.
Well, my point is that the people, because the lived experience is what motivates people. Jeremiah said, abstract ideas don't.
Well, there needs to be, I'm actually trying to say there needs to be a connection made between that like abstract, intangible, emotional, psychological experience to the concrete lives of Black America.
That's right.
That's what I'm trying to, and I think that's what.
And I agree. Well, okay. Well, I agree with. Well, it's our clarification, and I agree with.
Or what I'm saying is that the tech bro in California is connected to the homeless in Philadelphia. Yes. And that's also
they are connected. They are connected, but you see it. You see it. I agree. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I feel like we're getting back to Jerry when you talk about conducting nonviolence, back to the philosophy of nonviolence itself, where if someone is dreaming, if someone is lying to themselves, you have to orchestrate a confrontation with reality for that person. Yes. That could be a confrontation with a historical reality, with a physical reality in the neighborhood, or a moral reality. I feel like it comes back to that moral question for me, deep down. The whole point of constructing this confrontation with reality to snap the dreamer out of their dream is so to make the moral choice inevitable, so heavy that they can't bear it, but to make it. And I feel like that has embedded in that philosophy of nonviolence, to orchestrate this confrontation and make the moral choice inevitable, is a belief in the existence of a conscience in every person, in the capacity of the human being to make that choice, where no matter how asleep they are, how much they want to believe the lie they told themselves, they do have that capacity to transform and to make a choice. And so part of going through this exercise for me is also thinking about each person, the social democrat or the Trump supporter, my dad or whoever. It's like, what confrontation with reality can I make for this person?
Yeah. It's different.
Person, yeah, but it's still, I find that same confrontation, which leads to an inevitable moral choice. And they know that they're making it.
Yeah, I think part of it is like you have to actually know who you're talking to, and you have to know what the edge is. 'Cause I think, yeah, like you're saying, in every person there's some edge that people have not confronted. And that, I mean, yeah, like the edge is reality, but it's I think I've realized that I haven't thought enough, and I think in some ways, like seeing what you guys did with the art exhibit for, it impressed upon me, like, okay, like this is in part where we're going as free school, and you know, it's not something that we're going to be able to develop overnight, each of us as individuals, but I think, yeah, like just seeing what you guys did with exhibit and how you kind of responded to people's questions, which may have been in good faith or bad faith or somewhere in between. I think that helped me a lot to see kind of like, okay, like this is like in clear terms, this is what it means. And yeah, I think it's I don't know, I just feel like part of it's hard, like what we've already been saying, it's like you can't assume that, for instance, the policy questions are coming in good faith. And part of it is you have to like get underneath, you have to try to find a way underneath it. And the other thing is like you can't expect that you're gonna win every person either. Some people are just not interested. And that's a consequence of their own choices, but also a consequence of the time. And like part of what we try to do is, okay, like we try to find at least those people that may be searching or maybe thinking about it, but just don't have really an outlet for it. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, what my mind goes back to is like, I feel like what we fleshed out is also what you said earlier, Doc, about why or how the moral imperative is the revolutionary imperative. Because unfortunately, like, this is a time when, like, this is a time that essentially demands struggle as the moral choice, because there's not an easy way to do good, or to do what is honest or principled. And I feel like what we're also getting at is that many people like know much more than they might be willing to admit to themselves, because even in a place like the idyllic world we come from, I see the fissures, which is what Alice is saying. And I know that the people that live there know it's not the promised land. There's no way, you know, how can you have all this decadence, but you're not really fulfilled? That's a glaring contradiction.
The dissatisfaction is at a level perhaps we've never seen.
I think so. No, it's this. Well, it's also this Baldwin quote that we've been using a lot lately. Like at the time of the fall of an empire, like everything must be examined and re-examined, and this is precisely what we're talking about. Is what this examination and then this inversion will begin to look like. Yeah, but that idea is like very compelling to me, because I've said this before, but like I never knew I wanted to be a revolutionary, or that I wanted to live for the revolutionary transformation of this country. But I arrived here through like my journey with truth, and the fact that any moral decision I was trying to make could only be completed by arriving at like the attempt of a revolutionary transformation. Like that's something unique to the American situation right now. And for the like the Trump versus the Kamala vote thing, like it's very simple in my head, where if you see the contradiction, or if you see the moral compromise with each candidate, then isn't it very obvious that like the answer is neither candidate, and you're going to have to wrestle to determine what is actually a right contribution then?
And it's very obvious to say that like it's not the goal, like in this case. Yeah. I wanted to add to that because this is something that we've talked about in preschool before. I think most directly when we were doing the Henry Winston conference, this idea that something that comes out of that Black revolutionary chronology and also the Black proletarian imaginary is the idea that the revolutionary cannot always, like, it's not just the rational scientific that informs. So, even when we're talking about, this election, who to vote for or whatever, it cannot just be like taking two things and weighing them against each other and then deciding, oh, maybe this is a little higher, so I should do this. Because when Jeremiah, you asked that question about how is this different, it was surprising to me because I guess I've never really directly thought about this question, but it's a valid question. And the reason why I've never thought that what we were saying in preschool is the other side of what the Democratic Party is saying is because I don't think we are asking anybody to vote for Trump. I mean, that could be one of the outcomes, but that's not what we are focusing on, where it's like vote for Trump, so Kamala Harris or Biden don't win. What we are seeing is that the Democratic Party is the party of war, it's the party of white supremacy, it's the party that will lead this country to destruction, and it needs to be punished for the way it has treated the people, and it needs to be defeated. Whatever form that takes is up to, like Michelle was saying, for people to struggle with themselves and figure out. Because I know for everybody here who can vote, going to the elections and then just deciding to vote for Trump is not going to be easy, given how he has been speaking about Palestine in recent times. It's not going to be easy. So that might not be the answer that presents itself to everybody. But the one thing that we stand firm on is the Democratic Party needs to be defeated.
I think you're right.
Yes. And it's not entirely a rational decision. It cannot be reached, this conclusion cannot be reached by just saying, oh, lesser evil, bigger evil.
Yes.
And that is the standard. That is how people think. And this is how all my conversations at work, when we're trying, very simple questions that people don't have any answer for. When you can't answer them, like this question of why are Black people leaving the Democrat? When you can't answer it, you just go to that safe place of Trump is a fascist. Trump is going to take away reproductive rights. Well, if that's what is in store for America's future, you have to brace yourself for another struggle after the Democratic Party is defeated this time. You cannot postpone struggle. You cannot postpone, like, oh, we'll elect Kamala, secure our reproductive rights, and we'll have our gender pronouns. And then maybe, now that it's convenient for me, I'll think about Gaza again. It cannot be like that. It's not rational. The moral revolutionary imperative is not just reached or understood through the rational scientific.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, adding. I'm sorry, were you about to go?
No.
Adding to that, through the questions and framing that Blaze put, which is the idea of nonviolence, where you make you weigh good against bad, and you make this moral choice so heavy and so stark and clear in your life that you cannot help but make a choice, either to completely shut yourself off and make yourself cold, the way we've seen, like when they bring the Israelis on TV and they double down on the invalue of human life, or you choose something, or you choose to remove your participation and choose something else. And that something else is, like, I feel, the heaviest task upon us. In the civil rights movement, that confrontation between racism and love, I would say, and brotherhood, that was made very concrete. You can either feel this hatred or anger towards me, or I'll accept you into my arms as my brother. And in the case of the election, some people might say, oh, the moral choice to not participate in the system, don't vote for the Democratic Party, and you're saying go for Trump. I would not say that is the ultimate moral choice. We're trying to answer very difficult questions about the state and the nature of democracy and what the American people are, what they're capable of. And at this point, I feel the most convincing argument that we've been able to make, that we're still making, is that we can decide the future. we are going to work. We're not going to exist within the current system, and the moral choice is to try to at least work towards something out. And humbly so, it's a work in progress. But the goal that I have, which I think was compelling enough for me to want to live a little bit differently, a lot differently, is that you can make a contribution towards a different kind of future. And the more people that are convinced of that, the greater the revolutionary capacity of society. In whatever sections of society they live, if they're looking for an alternative with the right kind of values, the more concrete and the more real this new possibility is.
Wait, can I just add that what you said, it made me think that like Baldwin is really a theorist of, I also feel he's a theorist of interregnum, like of a period of interregnum, because he was theorizing on behalf of King even after the assassination of like a freedom movement and its leaders. And I feel that so much of what he's saying is instruction for how struggle can be taken up again, like in a period without a movement anymore.
So say that a little bit more. Say that one more time.
Like Baldwin as a theorist of the period of interregnum.
Oh, yes.
Because, well, for example, even this quote that he's like, if we can, like lovers, like, do you guys remember that quote? Something about like, if we can, like lovers, blah, 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 like insist on creating this new nation. I just think there's something in the language and the categories.
I think this is, if I might just add. See, I think not only is this a period where the ideological struggle is paramount, and in fact, I don't want to use that again because it's too high, it doesn't say enough. I guess one of the things we're trying to take away from today is we want to say more. But, and I guess I'm going to Crystal too, the interregnum is the quintessential period where the human must be emphasized and developed, where the human being is crying out. I mean, whether it's the Asian with a high-tech job in California, or the person that lives in Eddie's neighborhood, or the people that we know, there is something that they're crying out for. And you're right, Baldwin located it. And we talk about it in terms of love, which we, define, but it's something people in this society want that they cannot get from this society. And I think the free school is, I don't know that there are many places where this is being explored this way. But I think we can flesh out what we mean by the interregnum.
Should we just comment? What are the comments? Can I say one last thing?
Yes.
Because just what you said, it reminded me of this Baldwin. Well, he says this in his biography of King, and he says this about segregation, where he says that, I've said this before, but it's just one of those things that really is stuck in my head, where he says that it's clear, like King is saying, it's clear to everybody that segregation is dead. But the question now is how long and protracted and painful and expensive the funeral is going to be.
Damn.
Doesn't that apply so clearly to what we're talking about, this old system, this old standard that has allowed to be just unquestioningly uplifted in this country, but now is the time that is dying. And the question about the
I'm sorry.
I'm done.
I'm holding my hand because it's so moving.
Wait, the other thing I was thinking about was something that I feel like this came to mind when we were doing our first roundtable at the very end. Like, because there's because that where we reach, at the end of that discussion was also why, like, Baldwin does have such curious but so it took human metaphors for trying to describe the interregnum, like a marriage, but also a funeral. But then that's also, I mean, like a baptism. I don't know at this point. But you know, I'm all jokes aside. I think that the reason why we have found the language of we've already survived the last white nation, and we must forge a new one. Like we've reached the end of a last white a white nation, and we must forge a new language, a new way of being. All of that is, I think, reflected in what we've been saying today, and I feel like it's been really brought out to the surface. And I think it's something that I feel like there's a reason why it's a captivating formulation. It's been so productive for us. It's been so generative, but it is actually layers and layers of depth that I feel like it actually made me think a lot, because I feel like it was Nuri some time ago that pointed out, like, you know, we say like we need to achieve a last white nation. In some ways, Baldwin's almost already like that's been what's the next thing, but we're in this middle period. And so I feel like I sound like a broken record, to be honest, because I feel as if it came up in the discussion, but I was also a little bit reaching. It was a very challenging conversation for me personally, and it took every ounce of my every ounce of me to like stay on post and to like think so heavily, I think, in the political, but that actually it was the challenge also, like, of course, the format, as we talked about, like the live sort of discussion, the precision of our language, but it was also actually trying to do something new being actually like thinking about these things in such Baldwinian terms, which I also think was like the success that I feel like we learned that was the that had to be the way forward for the second day. And I think that is the way we move forward as part of school. And it is going to take, I think, a really creative engagement with Baldwin in this time. And I feel like it comes through, of course, in everybody's work and relationships in the reading groups. I've been thinking a lot about, of course, how this is going to be a part of all these exhibit tours that we will also be doing. I personally brought at least a friend, a newer friend actually from our reading group, to the exhibit at the Free Library. The first time I saw it since we inaugurated it, many weeks later, almost seeing it for realizing every conversation we're going to have is going to be that demand on us. Just as you're talking about how do you talk to one or two people, how do you, like, just same thing that we're always asking ourselves. But actually the everything's really heightened, I think, and the demand for our language, our formulations, our understanding of who the person is that we're engaging, or the people, all of it, it's demanding more and more. But I think that's why today's free school felt really special. I feel like we really pushed ourselves to like meet that demand for, like, whether it's like a revolutionary ideas, revolutionary language, but also engaging these things on the high level that needs to be engaged.
I hope that next week, maybe, if we should do the whole free school devoted to the question Gramsci's interregnum and Baldwin's answer to life in an interregnum, so to speak. But I think it is our effort intellectually. It makes us have to be more rigorous. We can't be intellectually lazy at this time, and we have to be constantly creative. And this is what I took away from this day, just the intellectual creativity. And I think we have to continue like this. This is, it's just so valuable. But and I do believe, and I think, because I have to say, almost every day I listen to not every day, but twice a week I look at the documentary. And every time I look at it, it's more emotional. I mean, it is a very moving, emotional thing. And if we can get our copyright issues straightened out, which I don't think they're that big, I think actually it does need to be entered into certain.
I think we should screen it or try to distribute it.
Yeah.
I don't know how, but like if we can get as many places to play it.
That's right, because it introduces the American people to themselves.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think, I think that last part, my two favorite parts. How many? Is it 3 or 4 parts to it?
4 parts.
It's 4 parts. What are the first two? Because I'm getting it confused.
The first part is about establishing Baldwin as coming from the black people movement and the
Okay.
witness for it. The second part is the part that is the question of the chronology, whether
No, that's the third part.
no, it's not.
That's the third part is the anti-colonial.
The third part is how the chronology can be understood when you see the connection of the Black freedom movement with the anti-colonial struggle. And then the last part is love.
Yeah, well, my two are the second and last parts. And I think, I think the whole thing is a unique contribution. That question of love in the interregnum. And it's a huge, and I really think it will touch people because that is something that is so palpably absent.
Right. Yes.
And but I think we can just keep digging and perfecting our language and getting it better. And I think we're close to that. Now, I think the moral question. But anyway. Do we have any more comments?
Yeah, a lot of comments.
Oh wow.
Okay. Please bear with me. Okay, so there was a brief conversation in the comments going back to Revolutionary Blackout Network. Bayard Plaid responded the reason why he wanted to see, or why they wanted to see a panel, was because they think they see a lot of crossover in values. Sparks.
Say that again, because what?
Crossover in values. And Sparks said, yeah, Revolutionary Blackout and the Free School Dialogue would be interesting. Those are two of my favorite podcasts. And then they're not sure if maybe there's some history with RBN, but basically the case that they're making is to build a revolutionary movement, these kinds of conversations are needed. I've seen nothing but goodwill and actions in community and online from RBN. That's the kind of unity we need. And then I think someone named Matt is throwing out other collaboration possibilities, like millennials are killing capitalism. I'm not actually familiar with any of these groups. Okay.
I know Jerry didn't know anything on the internet.
Okay, and then Fireplace says RBN are mostly poor people feeding poor people and providing political education and lots of love in the process. Sounds like a natural crossover with Free School. And Spark says, I've been watching since they began as Fred Hampton leftists. I donate $10 per month. And then also Gerald Horne came up again. Still trying to figure out why, like, we're against Gerald Horne. But then Todd says, the Free School has provided detailed critiques of Dr. Horne's counter-revolutionary decisions for years.
Yeah. But the person before Todd said they don't know why we don't agree with each other.
Well, yes, like the quote was, a while back, Doc also threw some shade on Dr. Gerald Horne, still trying to figure out why, ! Question mark.
Okay.
But there are many reasons why. And yeah, there are many videos. But then, let's see, there was a lot of contributions by commenters when we were talking about arguments that can be made against the Biden administration and like the policies and what has been achieved, quote unquote. Pittsburgh Dude says, another answer about the CHIPS Act could be about how it's domesticating chip production in order to prepare for with China. Another answer could be that those bills only address certain segments of society, but there's nothing like Medicare for all, which would universally improve lives. Another answer about those bills could refer to the Princeton study about oligarchy that Bernie Sanders himself references, about how nothing passes into law unless it benefits the oligarchy. Let's see. Spark says, American people may not have universal health care, but they're happy to pay for the illegitimate Aryan Nazi colony of Israel. That's the definition of insanity. Then Bambala is just saying plutocracy, oligarchy. Richard H. says, Biden is a political opportunist. He threw rail workers under the bus when he threatened those wanting to strike. He only became our labor president as we neared his bid for re-election. He's inconsistent at best on the question of labor. Let's see. None of these bills redistribute wealth or challenge the power of Wall Street oligarchs. And then Fired Play says, in reference to the talking point that Genocide Joe is the most progressive president, just ask them for evidence to that claim. They have nothing because it is just propaganda. Then they shut up, they're scared underneath. And yeah, okay, I think they're mentioning millennials are killing capitalism and Hiram Rivera. But okay, Richard H., this is an interesting point. You would not believe how many barriers there were to participation in some of these Build Back Better jobs training programs. In DC, many of the programs required candidates to hold state IDs. You could not have a criminal record. You could not owe any money in IRS-backed taxes. It was like they barred an entire populace from participating. And then Fired Play says it was the same thing for the fake student loan forgiveness. And that they hate that word forgiveness because what do you need to be forgiven for? Getting an education and serving your community with that knowledge. But then, but both the Democrats and Republicans are part of what's currently holding together this atrocious system. When people spout propaganda like this about like so-and-so is better, I often just say to them that what they said is a lie. I then move on with my day. Yes. Part of the strategy is to get them to shut up so there's more space for our voices and work. I tell them, as a poor gay person, I can't fill my fridge with tokenism in there. But then Matt said all positive reforms, I think in terms of policy, can be rolled back. Daruba bin Mohad says people today are refighting for victories the Black liberation struggle won decades ago. And then Richard H., one suggestion is to repeal the Taft-Hartley Act. And Fired Play, this was in response to Eddie's point or Eddie's argument about what he actually sees in Philadelphia. But they said, there are guys who used to sit on my front steps and smoke crack. Sometimes I pay them to help me with the community garden I have in my front yard, meaningful work and food for all. I haven't seen them smoking crack as much lately. Also, they're lovely people, salt of the earth, just unemployed. Policy is a byproduct of power. And so, and then M. Spark said, incremental policy change is the thief of progression. Amiri said, exactly, Alice. In response to language of policies or elections, I use concrete realities to transcend that discourse and place the focus on the people. I ask, beyond voting, what will you do? And what are you willing to sacrifice? In interrogating the assumptions of the system, we must reveal that one's own standards of living and imaginary of what's possible must change completely. And that's why the moral argument is important. People who are unwilling to do anything to vote or propose policies are also unwilling to face the suffering of poor Black and brown people worldwide. In asking, what are you willing to do? You also ask, what is your inner life? Where do you invest your time and energy? And what is the substance of your inner life and the values that you have? Let's see. And he's not sure if it's clear because he's still processing and developing the language, but basically confronting people directly about their own notions of reality and their personal responsibility to the future is critical. Because otherwise people will speak abstractly and generally about voting and elections and policies while removing themselves from the equation. And then going back up, Jahan had a comment. No, I have it. I found it. When the Social Democrats bring up infrastructure, I think we should challenge them to see the results of the infrastructure. Right. Biden's bills, along with the war and genocide spending, added $6.2 trillion to a national debt of $35.2 trillion. Inflation and prices are out of control. The national debt is 123% of the American GDP. This is an economically disastrous model to benefit the rich and murder Palestinians in Gaza. On the issue of labor, Biden took action to viciously crush the railway workers' strike. Union density is at a historic low, down from 20% of all workers in 1983 to 10% in 2023. Biden passed no legislation to support labor organizing, nor did he fulfill his promise to pass the George Floyd Policing or the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, nor legislation for Supreme Court reform for Roe versus Wade through the Democrat control, even though the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress for 2 years. Very extensive receipt. And then, let's see, I'm gonna skip around a little bit. Todd says, I think all Americans can on some level relate to the imperial war footing we all see. War is a primary contradiction in the here and now, and genocide and nuclear brinksmanship are at our doorstep. The person with the Chinese name says, policy is about the city because it's from the Greek word polis. And so what's successful in one city should be brought to the whole nation. Let's see. Bambalai7 says, race in general is still deep-rooted in American society, and yes, the Republicans also pose a threat to humanity, American hegemony. I don't know what that means, but let's see.
Just saying that the Republicans are also invested in American hegemony.
That's true. Miri says, yes, examine the unique context of each person you encounter and then specify. No one is as oblivious as they claim. The struggle that arises from the Black proletarian imaginary sees far, far beyond 2024. This imaginary always returns to the power and capacity of the people, rendering the current system obsolete and reorienting us to the decades-long struggle anchored in genuine love for human beings. Y'all continue to develop exponentially. Lastly, when talking to people with children, I always connect the future of humanity and the planet to the future of their children to make it very personal. And then, he's also been working on an essay called "I Don't Believe You When You Say You're Happy," which I think was in response to what Crystal. Very fun comments. And then I think there's maybe, let's see, okay. Okay. Someone said Tim Walz worked in China for a year and his students predicted the genocide in Rwanda when giving an examination of their style of communication. M. Spark says, this entire protectionism American electoral system is corrupt to its core. Voting is futile in the current system. When Barry Obama says, just vote, you know the cheese is rotten in Denmark. And then lastly, Bumbleye7 says, exactly, we must teach each other how to use our own creative and discerning minds. Love must be the root.
Oh, it's from Hamilton.
Yeah.
Yeah, something rotten in the state of Denmark. Well, just to that, I think, I guess, to end, what I've been thinking about is, how do we make the moral choice real to people? It's in part by sharing with people your life, and not in like an egotistical way, but just an actual clear and truthful way of like, okay, like, I don't know you, or maybe I do know you, but here's the choice that I've made for my life. And that choice is to take responsibility for this country and for the world, no matter what it takes. And I think, I don't think every person in free school has to be a policy analyst or policy like specialist or something. But I do think that like part of our task is, okay, like if we really do feel that responsibility, like how do we need to grow in order to meet that responsibility? And I think we're all trying to get there. But I think there's always times in which growing comes with like growing pains or comes with challenges. But yeah, I think this was a very interesting and useful discussion, and one that I think we haven't had in free school, at least in recent memory. Yeah. But with that, thank you to everyone who commented today. And we'll be back next week and likely talking about this concept of the interregnum and Baldwin and how to resolve it.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Bye.